Chapter 1879. Wei Wei Bai saw Xia Hanyang going to the balcony halfway through his revision. Why was he taking so long? She thought he was sneaking in for smoke. However, she heard him yelling on the phone to someone something about an old man, a little lover. She didn't even think about it at first. When she realized that he was referring to her as a little lover, she asked about the situation. Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm, thinking that she would explain the misunderstanding later. She would also believe his explanation. Another wave of affinity points. Perfect. So when Wei Wei Bai was about to smile, the system said, "You're finally back. You didn't even give me a sip of water in a meeting, and the topics were so boring that I slept for a few days." Wei Wei Bai, the system suddenly appeared and was a little shocked. The system took out a small biscuit and bit it. "How's your progress recently? The affinity points are already at 60, amazing speed." The system then flipped through the information and looked at it. The male lead's top student index has also become 0. Congratulations. Wei Wei Bai, 0. She was very confused. Why was it 0? It couldn't be 0. These days, Xia Hanyang's answering speed and accuracy had reached 95%. At least 60. She had to lower her estimate. The system said, "You must have been teaching him questions recently. Your teaching will count as points, but after crossing the threshold of 0, if the male lead doesn't have any intention to learn and doesn't change much in his studies, then his score will remain at 0. So, after crossing 0, the simple method of teaching him questions would not work. The male lead must take the initiative to learn and start to increase his score to increase the index." Wei Wei Bai, but he's always right. The system looked at the ground. "Oh, look at the phone, he's cheating." Wei Wei Bai. Then, the smile on her face slowly faded. Xia Hanyang was still explaining, "What I said just now doesn't count. I was talking about others, not you." He was worried that Wei Wei Bai would hear his words and put herself in his shoes. How hurtful. Just now he said the most vicious words. Otherwise, how could he fool that old man? Wei Wei Bai ignored him and bent down to pick up the phone on the ground. Xia Hanyang raised his eyebrows and had a bad feeling. Wait, what did he do with his phone just now? Looking at the questions? Wei Wei Bai unlocked her phone and saw that the revision questions she had assigned were all on a famous learning forum in China. The number of people who solved the questions below could be stacked up into a few hundred buildings. 5,000 for each question. Wei Wei Bai's heart clenched. She hadn't even felt the pain of seeing the cheating yet. He was defeated by 5,000. You can even hear the sound of money flushing into the toilet bowl. If it was so easy to earn, what was the point of her tutoring? Directly going to the forum to solve problems, it was extremely easy to earn $1 million a year. Bai Weiwei's fingers began to tremble, and even more so. That side quest had been unfrozen. Underachiever Neil activated. Scanning calculation. The other party's top student index is 0. Beep, beep, beep. Calculating again. 25 points in the exam. 20 points in a blind guess. Barely increasing the top student index by 1 point. 1 point of underachiever. I'm ashamed to be associated with you. Please try your best to express your disgust and disdain for the underachiever. Don't have any intimate sympathy. Wei Wei Bai. She had been busy for half a day, but this guy, Xia Hanyang, was still an underachiever. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss for a while. It was the first time she had been fooled. She looked at Xia Hanyang, and the gentleness in her eyes turned into disdain and darkness in half a second. Chapter 1880. You even fooled me by answering the questions. It seems that I'm really a cheap lover who is grateful to you for giving me a meal. Her face was in the shadows, with a murderous coldness. That bit of gentleness had completely disappeared into her pursed lips. Xia Hanyang was a little confused. It was the first time he encountered such a thing, so he was a little flustered. He tried to straighten out his mind and suppress his panic. His voice was a little hurried. You know that in a family like mine, I like to make my own decisions and help me control my life. You are an accident that my stubborn grandfather can't tolerate. When he saw her cold expression, his heart sank. Like a drowning man straining for the last rope, he grasped her hand. Her fingers were still a little cold. She had been trying so hard to nourish her body during this time, but her body still couldn't warm up. Her cold limbs were due to malnutrition. Therefore, during this period of time, he spent more time reading cookbooks than reading books. He didn't want to lie to Wei Bai, and he didn't like to study. So he had a bad idea. This was his habit. He used to like to take shortcuts when he encountered things. As long as the goal was achieved, the process was not important at all. He didn't think study was important. He just thought that she was important. So I lied to him and said that you are not important. You are my little lover, a woman who can come and go as I please. His tone began to tremble with weakness. Xia Hanyang held her hand, but he felt that her fingers were cold. Later, he realized that it was his hands that were cold. I can't compete with my family now, and I can't protect you by perishing together. I can only wrong you for now, Wei Wei. He tried to tell her his plan. Wait for me for 5 years, no, for years, or even 3 years. I will try my best to protect you, so you just need to stay by my side obediently. He didn't want to say these plans at all. After all, he only wanted to show off to her proudly when he won in the future. He was the best in the world. He could protect her. Even if they got married, no one would dare to stop them. He didn't want to say this when he was so weak and couldn't achieve anything, because it felt like he was making a promise without any sense of responsibility. Wei Bai looked at him indifferently, seemingly indifferent. This kind of look made Xia Hanyang feel a little depressed. He suppressed his discomfort and whispered, "So just pretend that you didn't hear what I said just now, or you can beat me and kick me as a punishment for being angry." He really treated her as his first love. Some men had no bottom line when they indulged in their first love. Xia Hanyang was the kind of person who would soften his attitude when he fell in love with someone. Bai Weiwei also felt that his attitude was somewhat inconceivable. He was too soft and cowardly. Why did it feel like their model was gradually moving towards the script of a scumbag woman and a scumbag man? If it wasn't for the side mission, she really wanted to pat his head and tell him not to be sad. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, the branch system began to stir. Wei Bai frowned and said to the system, "I already have a few top student indexes." She got full marks. If there were additional rewards, there would be more. System 27. In fact, Wei Bai's previous index was very low. The extra index was the pitiful score given by the branch system when it was rescanned. Wei Bai, that's too little. Chapter 1881. She originally thought that if the index points were high, she would soften her attitude once and deduct some points. But now it was not the problem of deducting points, but that Xia Hanyang was not in the mood to learn at all. Even if she deducted points this time, what about tomorrow? Every time she smiled at him, she would deduct 1 point. It was a temporary solution. And the index points were so slow, so it was impossible to complete the side task. Wei Bai's eyelashes drooped, suppressing the deep emotions in her eyes. She wanted to arouse Xia Hanyang's learning attitude and character. He had to be given something to be willing to learn. He was not stupid. He had the ability to learn, but he just didn't want to learn. This was fatal. Wei Bai thought about Xia Hanyang's character in her heart, but she didn't expect that he didn't plan anything. To learn, he really racked his brains. Finally, she reluctantly came up with a few ways to arouse his enthusiasm for learning. Wei Bai's expression didn't change, as if she didn't hear Xia Hanyang's explanation. The more she didn't say anything, the more depressed Xia Hanyang felt. He tried to reach out slowly, wanting to hug her. But before he could move, Wei Bai had already shaken off his hand. She shook it off with great strength. Xia Hanyang only felt the back of his hand burning. She took a few steps back and went straight back to her room without saying anything. Her lonely and cold back had a kind of lonely and fierce aura. Xia Hanyang thought that the matter would be over after he explained. But Bai Weiwei's attitude made his heart sink deeper and deeper. Finally, with a thump, it fell to the bottom. Was she really so angry? Xia Hanyang chased after her. But he found that the door was open and Wei Bai was packing her school bag. She didn't look up and just said indifferently, "I've troubled you during this time, student Xia." It's just that I can't teach you well, so you should hire another tutor. Xia Hanyang stood at the door and watched her coldly packing her luggage. No, she didn't take the things he bought. She just packed some books, school uniforms, and so on. She completely cut off all ties. It was chilling to the extreme. Even Xia Hanyang, who had a rough heart, was hurt for a while. Even his hands and feet were cold, and a vicious anger was flowing in his heart. It was as if thousands of small knives were stabbing into every part of his body. There wasn't a single spot that didn't hurt. Wei Bai packed up and walked straight to the door. Xia Hanyang suddenly stood in the middle of the door and held the door with both hands, completely blocking it. He no longer suppressed his anger and darkness. Have you never liked me? His voice was very low, but there was a hint of hoarseness and obvious anger in it. Wei Bai didn't say anything. Instead, she silently picked up her backpack. It was as if she had turned a blind eye to his anger, pain, and discomfort. If he really liked her, how could he be so cold? Wasn't it noisy at all? In the past, he despised those women for being pretentious and making trouble for him every day. Now he finally understood that those who were willing to mess around with you were considered to have given you feelings. He didn't even make a fuss. His face was calm and indifferent. It was enough to make people's hearts tremble. Only a person with no feelings could be so cool. Wei Bai seemed to be hesitating and enduring something, but she didn't say anything. She just said, I can't teach you. Find someone else. Xia Hanyang didn't panic and didn't tremble anymore. Instead, he was as calm as death. His eyes were unusually dark and terrible. Say that again? Wei Bai repeated flatly. I can't teach you, and I can't be your little lover, so let's go our separate ways. She was calm and indifferent. It could even be said that she had a businesslike attitude.
T.
Chapter 1882. For a moment, Xia Hanyang froze. He was like a big rock by the sea. Outside, the waves were roaring, but his mind was frozen. He finally pursed his lips and forced out an awkward smile. So, it's useless no matter how I explain. You don't like me, so you're just waiting for a reason to break up. During this time, the little bit of gentleness was fake. During this period of time, those few smiles were all fake. All of them were perfunctory. She lied to him. Xia Hanyang even wondered if he was a moron. How could he trample on himself and spoil her? Why did he feel that she was cute in every way? Even when she broke up with him, she was so hateful. Her cold and serene appearance was still ugly and hateful. Xia Hanyang suppressed his murderous intent and ordered word by word, Put down your school bag and continue to study. Go to school with me tomorrow. We'll do as usual. He gave her a chance. Let her go back on her words. Otherwise, he would go crazy. He had always been bad-tempered. If it weren't for her, he could kill her now. Wei Bai's expression remained the same, and there was even a trace of impatience in her eyes. She said, As usual? Why do you think we're acting like normal? Is it because of your empty promise over the past few years? Or is it because you're the worst student in school to protect me? Xia Hanyang said in a harsh tone, Study, study. I'm 100 times better than you even if I don't study. He was willing to be submissive during this time. But this was based on the fact that they liked each other. Once he found that she didn't like him, the kind of voluntary sacrifice immediately turned into a bad result. Xia Hanyang was full of resentment and resentment. Wei Bai suddenly looked up. Her calm expression disappeared, and her eyes turned red with anger. You really disappoint me, Xia Hanyang. She threw her school bag to the ground. Her voice was filled with anger. You keep saying that you can protect me, but what did you do? I put in so much effort to tutor you and think about improving your grades every day so that you can be smarter. How did you treat me? Xia Hanyang had never seen her in such a threatening manner. Even on that terrible night, she could only endure her incomparable sadness. Wei Bai sneered. A person who doesn't even want to study and only knows how to use the power of his family to bully others everywhere laughably promises that I can get rid of the power of my family and protect me. You are simply too stupid. Xia Hanyang was scolded by her and didn't know how to respond for a while. He moved his lips, but no words came out. Wei Wei Bai completely exploded. Xia Hanyang, you can't just say that you want to protect me. I know how powerful your family is. If your grandfather wants me to disappear, I can't resist at all. Xia Hanyang's fingers clasped the door panel, and his expression became cold. I won't let anyone hurt you. Why don't you believe me? Wei Wei Bai, to me, a man with 0 grades is not worthy of my trust. Xia Hanyang immediately corrected him loudly. Who said I got 0 points? I got 25 points this time. Wei Wei Bai, initially, he wanted to scold him to ignite his passion for learning. However, he was a lousy student. What was the difference between 25 points and 0 points? Wasn't it just a matter of correctly guessing the distance of a few multiple-choice questions? Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly, seeming to be desperate. Xia Hanyang also felt that he had gone too far. After all, it was his fault. Just as he was about to admit defeat, he saw Wei Wei Bai stagger a few steps and sit on the ground. Xia Hanyang was shocked and immediately squatted down to hold her. Wei Wei? Wei Wei Bai pushed his hand away. Her fingers were trembling badly, and her eyes were red, not because of anger, but because of sadness. Xia Hanyang, why can't you grow up? You can be 100 times better than me even without studying, but I don't dare to like you like this. Xia Hanyang was still confused. He just wanted to pull her up from the ground. He didn't want to see her cry. Since the day he took her out of that house, he only had one thought. He wanted to protect her. He said in a dry voice, "Don't be sad. You're not in good health." Wei Wei Bai seemed to have completely lost her strength. She put her head on her knees, her shoulders trembling. Xia Hanyang was really sad. He grabbed her hand, pulled her into his arms, and hugged her tightly. The feeling of having her in his arms made him feel a little better, even though he had hit rock bottom. He said softly, "It's fine to study. I can't be arrogant just because my family is rich. I've made money myself. I have a plan." He stroked her back as he spoke. He said aggrievedly, "It's not that I can't protect you if I don't study, but you don't believe me. Do you believe me if I study hard?" Wei Wei Bai immediately looked up, her eyes shining. "I believe you." After saying that, she immediately got out of his arms and pulled him. "What are you waiting for? Go and study." After giving in to Xia Hanyang, all his marks were deducted. If he didn't study quickly, there would be no more marks to be punished. Xia Hanyang. Crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu. Come download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m/sashu. So empty. Chapter 1883. The system was also speechless. It was not that this turn of events was unexpected, but it felt that the host would not let the male lead off so easily. With a cold face, Wei Wei Bai took out the grade 1 book again, then took out a pen and started taking notes. Start reviewing. Xia Hanyang was still a little dazed. He held the book and found it difficult to concentrate. He frowned and asked, "You're not angry anymore?" Wei Wei Bai, "Huh." Xia Hanyang asked carefully, "You're not leaving?" Wei Wei Bai, "Haha." Xia Hanyang immediately lowered his head and studied seriously. Wei Wei Bai looked scary when she was angry. With a cold face, Wei Wei Bai took out a piece of paper and started to write down the grade 1 questions. Then she handed it to Xia Hanyang. "Solve the questions first. Get a feel of it and revise." She thought that he had understood everything. After all, he did the questions well. Of course it was good. One question was 5,000. What kind of basic high school questions couldn't he solve? Xia Hanyang did not have any objections. As long as Wei Wei Bai did not suddenly make trouble with him, he felt that everything was fine. He picked up the pen and looked at the questions that he seemed to have seen before, but could not remember and thought hard. The system started to eat its biscuits again. It felt that the male lead in this world was very obedient. It chatted with the host. It seems that the side mission can be completed. The male lead seems to be very good. Wei Wei Bai. Ha ha ha. The system. The host looked very gloomy now. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were cold. Good my foot. Believe it or not, I'll slow you down to death in the future. Did he really think that she was here for a vacation? The system trembled. The male lead seems to be quite enthusiastic about you. Wei Wei Bai. An 18-year-old boy meeting his first love for the first time. He can express 10 out of 10 feelings. He only has 60 points of affection, but he can be as enthusiastic as 100. But enthusiasm was enthusiasm. She wanted him to learn. He was perfunctory, because he liked her, but only had 50 to 60 points of affection. Therefore, he would not even change his hobbies for her. He would do everything in his power to change his habits for her. If it was a favorability of 100 in that case, she didn't need to do anything to make him learn from the start. Believe it or not, Xia Hanyang would risk his life to learn. In the end, it was because the favorability towards him wasn't high enough. Wei Wei Bai said, I'm just joking around. The first time, he'll definitely feel uncomfortable, so he'll try to please me and learn from me for a few days. But after a few days, he'll feel bored and won't take it seriously. He really needed to study Xia Hanyang's character. Wei Wei Bai could point out a bunch of flaws in this guy. The only good thing about Xia Hanyang was his strong desire to protect. Perhaps it was because of his upbringing that caused him to express a strong sense of male chauvinism towards the person he liked. Therefore, his fondness for her was mostly based on his desire to protect her. Because in Xia Hanyang's eyes, her current life experience was miserable. Without his protection, she couldn't even eat her fill. That was why Xia Hanyang was so enthusiastic. Did he really think that by shouting a few promises and imagining a few beautiful scenes in the future, he would be able to fulfill them? Wei Wei Bai said, if we continue to interact like this, I think we'll be stuck around 80 favorability points. System said, then what about the rest of the learning? He took a few glances at the male lead's learning attitude. It was very perfunctory. In other words, Wei Wei Bai was clearly trying to get him to learn, and he was very clear about this. But he didn't plan to do it. Chapter 1884. If this goes on, the side task will be finished. Wei Wei Bai. I have to use a carrot to lure him away. The system silently took out a few small biscuits to eat. The host is becoming more and more mature. It seems that it is so idle that it can sleep. After about half an hour, Wei Wei Bai finally collected the test paper. She didn't say anything and just took a look at the test paper. Then she raised her head. Her dark eyes were hazy, but the coldness and alienation were very obvious. Xia Hanyang was a little embarrassed, even though he was thick-skinned. Then Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She directly took out a piece of paper and began to write the questions for the third year of junior high school. Yes, Xia Hanyang didn't know how to answer the questions for the first year of senior high school. It was obvious at a glance. Xia Hanyang felt that he had done something wrong, so his attitude was very soft. Seeing Wei Wei Bai writing the test paper, he immediately ran to the kitchen. It was time to drink the soup. He still remembered her nourishing soup. Xia Hanyang put the soup on the table. Wei Wei Bai had already given him the test paper. Do another one. Xia Hanyang. Drink the soup first. Wei Wei Bai. I want to do the test paper. Xia Hanyang stared at her. How could she delay her health? However, Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. Her expression was tense, without a trace of gentleness. Xia Hanyang had to do the test paper. It was okay if she didn't drink it. He would go to the kitchen and get another bowl later. Anyway, there was still a pot of soup. He finished the questions for the third year of junior high school, but didn't do much. Xia Hanyang quickly handed in the test paper. Wei Wei Bai didn't look at the test paper. Instead, she calmly picked up the bowl of soup and began to drink it. Seeing that she was obedient, Xia Hanyang immediately smiled. The young man's eyebrows were full of youthfulness and wildness. Wei Wei Bai finished the soup. She picked up the test paper and looked at it for 3 seconds. Finally, she held her head and thought for a while. Finally, she took out a piece of paper and wrote the questions for the first year of junior high school. This time, Xia Hanyang finally answered a few questions. Wei Wei Bai wanted to kill herself. Xia Hanyang's knowledge level was estimated to be from the 6th grade to the first year of junior high school. What was the use of revising high school lessons with him? His foundation was so bad that he couldn't even solve middle school questions. Wei Bai couldn't wait to pull apart Xia Hanyang, the worst of the worst, and stuff all the textbooks into his body. He wanted to see if he could gain more knowledge. Although Wei Bai's face was cold, she didn't leave and continued to help him with his homework. Therefore, Xia Hanyang thought that her anger had subsided. He tried to reach out, wanting to have intimate contact with her. Wei Bai slammed her hand on the table. Forget it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to bed. Xia Hanyang was anxious. He wanted to solve their conflict as soon as possible. I will study hard in the future. Wei Bai, you can't trust the words of a slacker. She stood up and said, if you really want to study, take out the first-year textbooks first. Then, you can memorize the second-year physics formulas tonight. Next, if he really wanted to lay a good foundation, the transformation of all things was the main focus. Fortunately, Xia Hanyang's English was passable. After all, he went abroad every day to play, so he didn't have to worry about English. Xia Hanyang held the textbook with a speechless expression on his face. He didn't know why what happened tonight had developed into memorizing the first-year physics formulas. Seeing Wei Bai's still cold face, he knew that she was still angry. Xia Hanyang could only bear the humiliation and nodded. I'll memorize them. Wei Bai cleared the table. Then I'll check how much you've memorized when I get up tomorrow. How much you've memorized proves how much you like me. Xia Hanyang held the book. Chapter 1885. Why is the physics formula related to the question of how much you like me? Wei Bai opened the door and suddenly paused. She turned around and looked at Xia Hanyang deeply. Under the light, her ink-black hair was scattered, her lips were rosy, and her skin was as white as snow. A girl of this age was not ugly as long as she was clean. If her facial features were delicate, she would be exceptionally attractive. The allure of youth was much stronger than any other age group. So she just stood there and looked at Xia Hanyang. Even Xia Hanyang was stunned by her beauty. Wei Bai suddenly reached out and touched her lips with her fingertips. I will reward you when you fully understand the knowledge of the first year. Xia Hanyang looked at her fingertips and the color under her fingers. When she turned around and closed the door, there was only the empty light and the living room left. Xia Hanyang suddenly woke up. Just now, Wei Bai's action was a hint to him. As long as he studied well, he immediately reached out and rubbed his face fiercely. The burning flame in his eyes was about to burn. He immediately opened the textbook, his mind full of rewards. If he could study well, he would be rewarded. He had to study hard now. Not long after Wei Bai closed the door, Xia Hanyang's academic genius index suddenly rose to 5 points. Because Xia Hanyang had a desire to learn. Wei Bai calmly wiped her lips. They were a little dry and needed to be applied with some lip balm. The system saw Xia Hanyang outside the room as if he was on steroids. Can your method make him continue to study? The male lead's enthusiasm to study was like a 30% hit. The way he looked at the book was like a volcanic eruption that could burn the book. Wei Bai said, boys at this age are more persistent than donkeys when they see this kind of carrot. If you don't give him some benefits, he won't take the initiative to study. Because Xia Hanyang was essentially a person who would not act without benefits. This was related to his family. How could a businessman drive him to study without benefits? At first, she didn't know that he was cheating and thought that he was really obedient and learning. Now, she knew that his love for her wasn't strong enough to disregard everything. He had changed his comfortable environment to accommodate her, to learn for her sake. Wei Bai said, wait until the affinity level rises. He will take the initiative to learn even if I don't give him the carrot. She said as she lay on the bed. I'll start to make a review plan tomorrow. With Xia Hanyang's knowledge level, it may be difficult for him even in the first year of junior high school. Therefore, she had to do her best to find simple and easy-to-understand learning materials for him. She was really worried about a bad student. The system replied, go to sleep, I'll keep an eye on him. Wei Wei Bai nodded and went to sleep. Midnight. Xia Hanyang stealthily opened the door with 2 dark circles under his eyes. The system was just about to call Wei Wei Bai. She found that he was sitting on the edge of the bed, but he didn't do anything. She just held the textbook, turned on a small light, and quietly read the book. Then he read a book while looking at the sleeping Wei Wei Bai. His eyes were strangely bright, like a person who had been hungry for a few days, emitting a green light. Xia Hanyang silently recited the formula. Then, when he was annoyed, he looked at Wei Wei Bai. She slept quietly on her side, her black hair spread out behind her. On the white bed, her delicate side profile in the shadows. It was unspeakably cute and pitiful. He wanted to touch her face, but he was afraid of waking her up. So, he could only bear with it. Chapter 1886. She was willing to take the initiative to give him what he wanted when she was good at her studies. After all, although they were in a relationship now, she was not willing to even hold his hand. If she was willing, she would take the initiative. In that case, studying didn't sound so boring. Xia Hanyang's body surged with a huge learning energy. He fell asleep looking at his prize. He touched the corner of his mouth and continued to read. System. The male lead's donkey didn't seem to be honest at all. He was almost like a hungry wolf. But to get the reward, he was willing to do anything. Sure enough, the male lead would not move without benefits. Wei Wei Bai woke up, and the system told her what happened last night. She thought of Xia Hanyang sitting at her bedside reciting books. She sighed, "Teenagers are really energetic." Then the scholar index rose again. Xia Hanyang's scholar index was 8 points. And, because she helped Xia Hanyang study, she would get points for helping a bad student. She had a scholar index of 20 points, so she could avoid 2 punishments. Xia Hanyang, with 2 dark circles under his eyes, came to guard the door early. Then he took the initiative to recite the formula. It was not difficult for Xia Hanyang to recite without asking for a deep understanding. Wei Wei Bai listened carefully and found that he was really reciting, not the perfunctory kind. Finally, the donkey was serious about studying. The scholar index also slowly rose by 2 points to 10 points. She didn't dare to show any gentle smile for fear of being punished, so she just looked at him indifferently. "Well, then let's do the questions while eating. Give me your phone." Xia Hanyang touched his pocket and handed her the phone. Wei Wei Bai opened the application center and downloaded the question bank app for him. Then she said, "I'll download the junior high school question bank for you, and then you can start to do the questions today." Xia Hanyang memorized the formula all night, and his mouth was dry. He picked up the water and took a big gulp and said, "If I really understand the questions of the junior high school, will you really give me a reward?" Wei Wei Bai looked up at him and seemed to hesitate. Xia Hanyang's heart trembled. Was he planning to go back on his word? There was something wrong with the way he interacted with Wei Wei Bai. In the past, it was always other women who took the initiative to stick to him. If he was willing, he could probably do anything in a day. But it just so happened to be with Wei Wei Bai. The relationship between the two of them was said to be a relationship, but their relationship was cleaner than pure water. It wasn't that he couldn't take the initiative, but she had experienced that kind of thing before. He was too proactive and worried that she would be traumatized. With this delay, he couldn't do anything. It was not easy to see Wei Wei Bai relenting. As long as he studied, she would take the initiative. He was happy the whole night. Wei Wei Bai frowned. She suddenly stood up and walked in front of him. Then, she lowered her head and gently kissed the top of his head. The kiss was like a dragonfly crossing water. Butterflies sweeping wind. There was no trace of it. There wasn't a single trace of feeling that would make people think the wrong way. Instead, it was incomparably beautiful and pure. Xia Hanyang was stunned. He didn't even feel the temperature of her lips. He only felt that her hair brushed against his. But this kind of touch was so light that it was almost non-existent. However, it made his fingers tremble. Her eyes were still indifferent, and her expression was calm. Being close to a bad student, 10 points deducted. 10 points remaining. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, "Continue to eat. I'll teach you how to use the formula." Xia Hanyang couldn't help but reach out and touch his hair. He just knew how to recite some physics formulas. She was actually willing to take the initiative. If he knew all the questions, would they be closer than any other couple? Once this idea came to him, Xia Hanyang couldn't suppress it. He held the bowl, and a strong desire to learn broke out for the first time. Wei Bai felt that Xia Hanyang's eyes were shining with a hungry green light. Then she heard the sound of the favorability rising. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 65. This kind of increase was particularly impure. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1887. Wei Bai spent almost 3 hours on the questions and explained several formulas to Xia Hanyang. She had prepared a thick stack of materials. She had printed out more than 20 questions from the question bank on the app. Xia Hanyang's foundation was so bad. She had to work hard. Xia Hanyang gave her some water to moisten her throat, which was specially brewed for her. He didn't make soup for her. Now he was focusing on various kinds of health tea to reduce heat. When Wei Bai was teaching, she wouldn't stop until he understood the questions. Xia Hanyang felt sorry for her. Wei Bai took it expressionlessly and took a sip, showing disdain in her eyes. But she didn't say anything. She packed up the textbooks and papers. Today, the school gave out the papers of the last exam. She was still the first. Perfect full marks. Xia Hanyang was indeed 25. Seeing the score, Wei Bai had the impulse to hit Xia Hanyang with a book. She had taught him for nothing and helped him review for so long. He didn't remember anything at all. Fortunately, he finally became serious these 2 days. But the way he looked at her was no different from a wolf looking at meat. Every time he looked at the textbook, he would look at her. He looked at her as if he was thirsty. His eyes were green, and he was almost wiping his saliva. Wei Bai guessed that Xia Hanyang was preparing seasoning in his heart. He wanted to cook her and eat her. After all, studying was so boring. He had to find motivation to stay alive. After the lesson, it was almost time for the evening self-study. They didn't live on campus and rarely came to the evening self-study. Today was unexpected because after class, Wei gave him a lecture. Because the lesson was too late, they had dinner in the cafeteria. Then they came to the evening self-study. Xia Hanyang was still enthusiastic about learning and didn't object. It was almost 11 o'clock. Xia Hanyang glanced at the time, immediately picked up the bag, and packed everything. Then, he packed Wei Bai's things together. His school bag couldn't hold so many review materials. Xia Hanyang asked, "Do you want a midnight snack?" Wei Bai shook her head. "Walk with me." Xia Hanyang thought, "Isn't this a date?" He immediately called the chauffeur and gave him his school bag and things. Then, she followed Wei Bai out of the school gate. The moonlight was like silver, silently pouring down on the ground. Xia Hanyang received another call. "Brother Xia, come out and play. There's a new bartender who can spit fire recently.
Come dance and drink."
Xia Hanyang was so annoyed that he had blacklisted several of his friends. How could they still call him and ask him to drink and dance? Didn't you see that he was studying hard? Xia Hanyang shouted in a low voice, "Get out of my sight. I have serious business to do." The other side. Serious business? Picking up girls? How long have you been soaking in it? Why haven't you gotten used to it yet? Why don't I help you out and warm up your relationship? He was going to tell him to scram. Hearing this, Xia Hanyang narrowed his eyes. He looked at Wei Bai and saw that she was walking with a relaxed expression. It seemed that taking a walk in a quiet atmosphere could make her feel better. She seemed to notice Xia Hanyang's gaze and looked at him gently. Her misty eyes were so seductive in the night. Xia Hanyang swallowed his saliva secretly. He coughed softly and said seriously, "You can make your own decisions. Don't bother me. I'm a man who needs to get full marks in his studies." The other side of the phone understood what he meant. Chapter 1888. The person on the other end laughed wretchedly. "Brother, don't worry. I promise you'll be a hero, and you'll get a beauty early."
Speak more if you know how to speak.
"It's good to hear." Xia Hanyang hung up the phone calmly and then looked disgusted. They're the kind of rich playboys who claim kinship with my family. If it weren't for the fact that we meet frequently, I wouldn't even bother to brush them off. The system had already repeated their conversation. After hearing this, Wei Bai felt her fists itch again. She didn't have enough time to study. It had been a few months, and the college entrance exam was right behind her. Xia Hanyang was distracted every day. Wei Bai snorted at the system. I guess they met a hooligan on the road, and Xia Hanyang beat them away with a few punches. Then he took the opportunity to do whatever he wanted to me. Such an old-fashioned trick. Why were there still people who didn't get tired of it after thousands of years? Wei Bai's eyes were as cold as ice, which made Xia Hanyang a little scared. Could it be that she saw through him? Xia Hanyang saw a nearby supper shop open. It sold porridge and wontons. Although he was a young master, he had eaten everything when he went out to be ridiculous. He had eaten at food stalls and roadside stalls. If it weren't for the poor hygiene conditions, the taste would actually be good. Especially when he was racing, sometimes when he was hungry, he would directly eat hamburgers and then drink. His life was very carefree. But now he was studying hard. Xia Hanyang touched his chin, wondering how he had fallen to this point. But when he saw Wei Bai's delicate and beautiful side profile and saw the expectation in her eyes, he suddenly felt that everything his mother had done was worth it. After all, if he didn't watch Wei Bai closely, what if she ran away? Or if she was seduced by someone else who would compensate? He had to watch over her by himself. Anyway, she didn't know how to race, drink, or go to the amusement park. It was no problem to leave it for now. Xia Hanyang turned to Wei Bai and said, "Eat some supper and then go home." Wei Bai saw the supper shop. Some students who were studying at night also went in to order a bowl of noodles or wontons. She knew that Xia Hanyang was trying to stall for time until those bullies came, so that he would have time to save the damsel in distress. Wei Bai didn't say anything and just walked into the shop. The shop was very clean, but the items were actually more expensive than other places. After all, their school was quite famous. Middle-class children who were able to squeeze in and study also squeezed in a lot. This group of people was the main force of the supper shop, so they didn't lack the small difference in the price of supper. After Wei Bai sat down, Xia Hanyang immediately picked up the menu. "What do you like to eat? Beef noodles or wonton soup? I see seafood porridge. Shall I order a bowl for you?" Seafood porridge was the most expensive. Wei Bai lowered her head and glanced at the menu. "Wonton soup will do." When she said this, she had to feel disgusted in her heart, because the rule was that they could accept Xia Hanyang's things. But in his heart, he must despise him. If she continued to despise him like this, she would really get used to it. Xia Hanyang waved his hand and asked the waiter to come over. He ordered beef noodles and wonton soup. Then he also ordered a plate of fried mantis shrimp, a plate of crabs, fried pork with Chinese broccoli, and fried shrimps with chives. He ordered whatever he saw with the highest price. It was a supper, but he ate all seafood. He wasn't afraid of stomach problems. While waiting for the dishes, Wei Bai took out a small notebook from her pocket. "I have some time. Memorize a few formulas." Memorize? Xia Hanyang was stunned. Of course, he had a passion for learning. After all, Wei Bai was such a big reward. But he still had to take a break. Xia Hanyang rested his chin on his hands and sighed. "I feel like I've become a formula spirit. How can there be so many formulas to memorize?" The download address is at https://www.
Sashu.
Comni is at https://m Sashu. com//t. Chapter 1889. He wondered if those damn mathematicians and physicists had eaten too much. What the hell were they researching? Was the Earth round? How round was it? Why did things fall down instead of flying up? What was water made of? What were electrons, protons, neutrons? There were also a bunch of formulas like spider silk. Xia Hanyang said that if he could time travel, he would take a cannon with him. He would blast those experts who were researching these things to death.
He would blast them to death.
Where did so much knowledge come from? It was all because of you bastards who had nothing better to do. Wasn't it good to eat, drink, and play? What kind of science was this? Xia Hanyang gritted his teeth, but still smiled kindly. Okay, let's recite the formulas. He ground his teeth and stared at Bai Weiwei like a tiger eyeing its prey. Reciting a formula was like having to bite Bai Weiwei to be satisfied. Weiwei Bai felt that Xia Hanyang's eyes were more aggressive. She touched her arm and got goosebumps when he looked at her. Fortunately, the food she ordered came. She put the small notebook in her pocket and began to eat supper. She kept Xia Hanyang hanging with rewards. He was like a hungry wolf. He had a passion for learning, but his male instincts were also hooked. Xia Hanyang saw her lowering her head, holding a spoon, and gently scooping up a white wonton. Then she bit it, and it slipped into her mouth. The lights in the restaurant were on. She ate slowly again. Her bangs covered her eyes, and the red color on her lips was more obvious. Weiwei Bai paused and looked up blankly. Xia Hanyang didn't look at her, but ate the noodles in big mouthfuls. Weiwei Bai thought that she had misunderstood, so she lowered her head and continued to eat the wonton. But that faint touch came from time to time. Xia Hanyang's heart was beating fast. He ate without hiding it and soon finished the noodles. Weiwei Bai only ate half of the noodles. His legs were already a little numb, but he still refused to give up and wanted to touch her pants under the table. Xia Hanyang planned to buy her a lot of dresses in the future. If it was a dress, he would have taken advantage of her now. His foot seemed to touch her exposed ankle. Weiwei Bai frowned and moved her foot away. Xia Hanyang couldn't help but chuckle, and then he pretended that nothing had happened. He peeled the crab for her. His long fingers were as white as jade, which showed that he was pampered. He put the crab meat to her lips. Eat some. Weiwei Bai's lips trembled, and she was about to say no. However, Xia Hanyang didn't give up and forced the crab meat into her mouth. In that short contact, the warm breath almost wrapped around his fingertips. Bai Weiwei pulled out her fingertips, wiped her mouth, and swallowed the crab meat before saying, "I'm full, let's go." 2. Xia Hanyang also felt that he had gone too far. Worried that Bai Weiwei would see through his bad intentions, he obediently paid the bill and planned to leave. Just as he walked out of the door, he heard the rumbling of a group of motorcycles. Xia Hanyang saw a group of men holding baseball bats, wearing helmets, and riding motorcycles towards them. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on "You Can See It" when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like. Chapter 1890. Xia Hanyang's eyes lit up. Here came the chance to be a hero, to save the beauty. The people around him were not good at studying, but they were good at all kinds of messy things. He rolled up his sleeves and decided to beat them until they couldn't take care of themselves. Then he would get Weiwei Bai's sympathy, and then he would be able to hug her openly. Sure enough, the group of people on motorcycles was very arrogant. They immediately surrounded them after they came over. "Hey, girl, you look good. Go and play with me." Weiwei Bai. This stupid line is really the average level of Xia Hanyang's playboy. If people don't study hard, even their friends are animals with low IQ. Bai Weiwei was very calm and gave him face by hiding behind Xia Hanyang. "Let's call the police," she said in a very calm voice. "Xia Hanyang, how can you play the hero after calling the police?" He immediately sneered and said to the group of people, "While I'm in a good mood, I'll give you 10 minutes to escape." The few men riding motorcycles immediately rushed down from their motorcycles in a threatening manner. Then they rushed over with baseball bats. "You want to do this the hard way? You're kind enough to take your girlfriend to play, but you're a weakling." Xia Hanyang pulled a long face. Who was a weakling? Did this group of underlings not eat, drink, and play when they saw him? Did they think that he couldn't deal with them? Xia Hanyang rushed over without saying a word and punched the one in the front first. Then he took the opportunity to kick another person in the abdomen and kicked him out. He had been saving his strength. Those people were also very experienced. They fell just like that. If an inexperienced person were to look at it, they would definitely be frightened. Xia Hanyang's eyes were full of anger. He grabbed a person's collar and was about to beat him down with his fingers. That person immediately said, "Brother Xia, we're on the same side. Be gentle." Xia Hanyang said, "You scolded me." Then he used his strength to beat him down. Although it was heroic, it was not sincere enough. Xia Hanyang saw Wei Wei by standing on the side of the road. She looked calm, different from other girls. Why didn't she look scared at all? It must be because he was too powerful that she was not afraid anymore. Wei Wei Bai chatted with the system. "Sigh, my acting is really getting worse with each generation." The system replied, "Yeah, it's too fake." What was even more ridiculous was that so many people with baseball bats couldn't beat Xia Hanyang. This was an impossible thing. It just happened like a magic fantasy. Xia Hanyang also felt that it was a little fake, so when he hit the other person, he secretly said, "One of you should rush to Wei Wei. Remember to scare her, so that she can't be hurt. Then I will rush over and hit my arm. Don't break my arm, but I want a scary bruise." This request was too much. The little brother was a little confused. However, he could only nod. After all, it was not easy for Xia Hanyang to fall in love with a girl. He would lose face if he didn't get her. Therefore, he winked at the people behind him and pretended to be knocked down by Xia Hanyang. One of them immediately understood. He rushed to Wei Wei Bai with a baseball bat and was about to hit her head. Xia Hanyang dropped down from the sky. He put his arm over Wei Wei Bai's head and caught the fatal blow. It was so painful. Xia Hanyang glared fiercely at the guy who hit him. Then he kicked him away and immediately turned around with a pained expression. "Wei Wei, my arm is broken. You run first, I'll cover you." Wei Wei Bai thought, "You're so good at pretending. I can't bear to expose you." She nodded. "Okay, good luck." After that, she was about to leave. Xia Hanyang was speechless. This was not how the script played out. There must be something wrong. He immediately chased after her and grabbed her arm, shouting, "No! How can I let you go alone? What if we encounter danger? I'll carry you." What a heroic look. Bai Weiwei was pulled along by him as he ran forward. Suddenly, a few black cars rushed in front of them. One of the cars opened its door, and a few people wearing masks rushed over. Xia Hanyang frowned. There was more to it? Then his brows relaxed. It was better to have more twists and turns. Then Wei Wei Bai would believe it. However, Wei Wei Bai felt that something was wrong with this group of people. But Xia Hanyang, this idiot, was actually rushing towards the black cars. She immediately pulled him back. "Xia Hanyang, wait." It was too late. The two of them were caught and thrown into the car. The black cars soon disappeared. As for the motorcycle gang members lying on the ground, they looked at each other in dismay.
Whose men are they?
"I don't know. Aren't we the only ones here?" In the car, the driver said coldly, "Don't create unnecessary trouble. Why did you suddenly kidnap these two brats?" A man wearing a mask with a scar at the corner of his eye looked coldly at Xia Hanyang. He held a knife in his hand and sneered. "We've met a big fish." Xia Hanyang was speechless. "Kidnapping?" He finally reacted. Wei Wei Bai laughed. Haha. She suddenly doubted that with Xia Hanyang's IQ, how could he complete the task of getting the top student index of 100? Learning also required a brain. Chapter 1891. He is the little bastard of the Xia family. Do you know him? He is the only heir of the Xia family. It's easy for him to spend tens of millions of yuan. The man with the knife looked at Xia Hanyang coldly. His eyes were like a poisonous snake, and his temperament was extremely cold and experienced. He was not comparable to those children who played with Xia Hanyang on the street just now. Xia Hanyang moved very slowly and stared at this group of people. He found that everyone seemed to be very leisurely, but no matter their sitting posture or expression, they were very cold, with a murderous aura. Xia Hanyang moved reluctantly and finally protected Wei Wei Bai behind him. He was speechless with himself in his heart. His life was too comfortable. Recently, his attention was drawn away by Wei Wei Bai. Otherwise, he would not have rushed to the black car at once. Now he was in the thieves' den. He even got Wei Wei Bai involved. Xia Hanyang gently fiddled with his watch with his fingers. Although this action was very calm and cautious, it was still discovered. The man with the knife immediately kicked his hand away with one foot and trampled on his watch fiercely. Then he picked up the watch and sneered, "GPS?" After that, the man threw the broken watch out of the window. Then, he grabbed Xia Hanyang and pinched his neck tightly. "Boy, I don't want to embarrass you. After all, you are very valuable. But don't be too disobedient, or you will suffer." Xia Hanyang's eyes were extremely cold, and he was not very afraid. But there was a flame of anger in his dark and gloomy eyes. The man was stunned and sneered, "You are still a wolf cub." After that, he threw Xia Hanyang on the seat. Xia Hanyang did not do anything else, but instinctively hid Wei Wei Bai behind his back. He could feel that Wei Wei Bai's body was leaning against his arm. Her long hair seemed to fall on his shoulder, and then slip away. Xia Hanyang was afraid that she would be frightened. He could only grope and stretch his hand back. Finally, he touched her slightly cold fingers. Then, he held her hand tightly, as if he was afraid that something would happen to her. He interlocked his fingers. Wei Wei Bai's fingers seemed to tremble, but she did not break free. The man with the knife looked at them expressionlessly. "Or a pair of lovers?" The driver said, "Well, we can't stay here for too long. We have to hurry. We have to leave tomorrow evening." The man said, "Don't worry. I'll make a call later. We'll earn the money tomorrow morning and leave the city." Xia Hanyang stared at them. He knew that he was in the most terrible situation. This was because they had actually encountered a group of veterans. Furthermore, they were a group of very experienced wolves who wandered in blood and darkness. These people were very difficult to deal with. And it wasn't just once. Because of their attitude, the act of tying him up was a very common thing. Several thoughts flashed through Xia Hanyang's mind. His fingers were so nervous that he even hurt Wei Wei Bai's hand. Wei Wei Bai frowned and suddenly reached out to touch his shoulder, as if to comfort him. She whispered, "Xia Hanyang, don't play like this next time." Xia Hanyang stiffened and said, "I'm not playing. I don't know these people." Wei Wei Bai said, "Yes, but I know those people on the street just now. I've met one or two of them on the cruise ship." Xia Hanyang blushed. No wonder Wei Wei Bai was not afraid at all just now. It turned out that she knew that it was his trick. This was embarrassing. But this time it was really unexpected. Xia Hanyang didn't know that he was fooling around. He couldn't let the two of them mess around. Wei Wei Bai whispered, "But it's true now." Xia Hanyang wanted to say that he was fooling around, but it was true. The atmosphere was very dignified.
And
Chapter 1892. As the car drove towards the suburbs, the street lights gradually became sparse and finally turned into darkness. Only the car's headlights were unusually eye-catching. Green hills began to appear outside the car window. Xia Hanyang's expression became more and more solemn. They were directly brought into the mountains. Even if the Xia family wanted to find him quickly, it would be almost impossible. And just now, his and Wei Wei Bai's phones were confiscated. The only good thing now was that the other party did not take off their masks. That was why they did not want to kill them. Wei Wei Bai looked at Xia Hanyang. She listened to the information from the system. She knew that she had encountered a group of inhumane people. She asked the system, "Is it difficult to survive?" The system said, "Yes, this group of people is ruthless. Once they get the money, they might not let you go." There were a few cases before. They all killed the hostages. That was why this group of people had such a strong murderous aura. Xia Hanyang was too inexperienced to escape in front of so many people. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "Is there anything to escape?" The system said, "I'll go search, but because of the meeting, many of the supermarket's functional areas will be closed."
it may take some time.
During the meeting, a large number of systems returned to the system world. The supermarket would be closed immediately. Now that he had returned early, there were not many systems that returned. So the supermarket might not be open to too many people. This was because the supermarket relied on a large number of outgoing systems to survive. Without outgoing systems as customers, To avoid losses, the supermarket would be closed directly. Wei Wei Bai nodded, but did not insist on buying anything. The system was reliable. If it said it did not have anything, it really did not have anything. It would not deliberately kill her. Xia Hanyang kept holding Wei Wei Bai's hand. His palm was sweaty. He was nervous. After much difficulty, the cars finally entered the mountains and arrived at a hunter's wooden house. The wooden house was relatively large and was divided into 3 rooms. Wei Wei Bai and Xia Hanyang were thrown into the smallest wooden house. Then the door was locked. The group of people did not do anything unnecessary. After they went out, 2 people guarded the door, while the rest went to eat and drink. He seemed to think that tying them up was a small matter. Xia Hanyang finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that they didn't do anything. He was most afraid that those people would molest Wei Wei Bai.
Fortunately, they didn't.
Xia Hanyang turned around, intending to comfort Wei Wei Bai. She must be scared. When he turned around, he saw that Wei Wei Bai was calmly observing her surroundings. Then she dragged him to the side, away from the wooden door. They sat on 2 stools. Wei Wei Bai said to him seriously, "We were kidnapped." Xia Hanyang looked at her calm face. There was no trace of fear in her eyes. He swallowed the comforting words he was about to say. Bai Weiwei leaned against him, her leg pressed against his leg. The 2 people's bodies were so close. Their auras and temperatures intertwined. Even at such a tense moment, Xia Hanyang was in a trance for a moment. She leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Remember the address. It's about 3.5 hours' journey from here to our city." Their car passed through a mountain road that looks like a cliff. Look at the distribution of the trees. After leaving the wooden house, they must have run south. There's a stream nearby that can lead the way. The more Xia Hanyang listened, the more shocked he became. The road just now was too dark. He also wanted to remember the road, but it was impossible because he couldn't see anything. However, Wei Wei Bai remembered the road. She even gave them a chance to go out. He pulled Wei Wei Bai into the forest. Download the at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1893. Relying on the road conditions that Wei Wei Bai described, they would definitely be able to escape from here and enter the city. Xia Hanyang finally couldn't help but ask, "Can you see the road?" Wei Wei Bai, didn't I tell you that I'm short-sighted? A short-sighted person actually couldn't see in the dark more than a non-short-sighted person. Xia Hanyang. Indeed, she didn't say that. And Wei Wei Bai had never shown a trace of myopia. She didn't squint to look at people, nor did she worry about not being able to see the blackboard clearly. Except for her hazy eyes that were especially beautiful. She was no different from a normal person. Wei Wei Bai sighed. This is the consequence of not studying. I can't see, but I can hear. Every time the car turns, I calculate the formula. The smell of the trees is different. As long as I rely on my sense of smell, I can guess the tree species. And the distribution of the plants allowed people to distinguish where they were. Of course, more importantly, the system said that. For the first time, Xia Hanyang felt that learning could be so amazing. His eyes lit up as he looked at Wei Wei Bai with a sense of worship. It sounded so amazing. Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm, but she silently said too in her heart. Finally, she seduced Xia Hanyang to have more motivation to study. After Xia Hanyang exclaimed, he felt an itch by his ear. He was too nervous and realized that Wei Wei Bai was afraid that someone would hear their conversation. Her whole body was pressed against him, and her soft lips rubbed against his earlobe. His ears were sensitive and turned red immediately. A numb feeling spread from his ear to his cheek, to his neck, and then to his shoulder. Almost half of his body was numb. He slowly exhaled. It was all warm. At this time, he was crazy to still have such thoughts. Wei Wei Bai still said softly, "Don't be nervous. Don't be afraid.
Do what they say.
Don't get into a conflict with them, okay?" Xia Hanyang's brain knew what she was saying. But all of his attention was on her breath, her soft voice. In this silent wooden house, there was a different kind of gentleness. He couldn't help but gently nod his head. Sure enough, Her lips accidentally brushed past the cheek under his ear. She seemed to be startled and retreated backwards. He wrapped his hand around her waist and pulled her into his embrace. "Don't move. Don't make them suspicious." He put his arms around her and said softly. As expected, Wei Wei Bai didn't move. She obediently leaned against his chest and clasped his arm with her fingers. She seemed a little nervous. Xia Hanyang whispered, "Don't be afraid. They'll let us go after taking the money. My family has plenty of money." He looked so rich and overbearing. Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes, silently. The system suddenly said while chewing on a biscuit, "The supermarket closed too many shelves. I spent 30 life points to buy a gilly box." Wei Wei Bai asked, "Gilly box?" The system said, "It's like a lottery. Once you use it, there's a 50% chance that you'll be safe." Wei Wei Bai said, "It's better than nothing. Since we've already bought it, why don't you try it?" The system replied, "Yes, let me use it." He then opened the gilly box. A note thanking him appeared inside. The system said, "So, is this useful or not?" Suddenly, there was a flash of lightning outside the window and a storm came. The people outside immediately closed the door. The storm was too fierce. However, their words could still be heard. "The signal is bad. Can you contact them? The longer we delay, the more anxious they will be. The more room we have for negotiation." "Yes." Then there was the sound of lightning and thunder again. Xia Hanyang suddenly realized something. He reached out and pulled Bai Weiwei up, then hid her behind him. "If someone comes in, don't make a sound. Hide behind me." Download the at https://m Sashu. Calm the button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 1894. Xia Hanyang had just finished his words. The door suddenly opened, and the man wearing a mask came in. Then he kicked Xia Hanyang in the stomach without saying a word. Xia Hanyang didn't react in time. He was kicked and bent over, almost falling to the ground. Wei Wei Bai's pupils shrank. She immediately reached out and hugged him. The man pushed Wei Wei Bai away. He was so strong that Wei Wei Bai fell to the ground without making a sound. Xia Hanyang had told himself to be patient, but when he saw Wei Wei Bai being pushed out, he exploded. He was about to explode. Without thinking, he raised his fist and punched the guy in the face. It was not a good time to start a conflict, but Xia Hanyang was full of anger. He wished he could break the man's hand. The man sneered, "Little bastard, you'd better practice for a few more years, you pampered little bastard." After that, he dodged Xia Hanyang's fist and threw him to the ground. Then he put one knee on Xia Hanyang's back. After subduing Xia Hanyang, the man put the phone to his ear. "Scream twice and let your grandfather hear it." Xia Hanyang guessed right. After the phone was connected, they would let him talk to them before they could get the money. Xia Hanyang closed his mouth and gloomily looked at the man with a scar on the corner of his eye. His eyes were burning with resentment. The man was stunned. He suddenly got angry and punched Xia Hanyang hard with his fist.
"Talk.
Do you want to die?" Xia Hanyang thought of the scene when Wei Wei Bai was pushed away. He suppressed his embarrassment and anger and didn't want to admit defeat. It seemed that only in this way could he feel less guilty. If it weren't for his evil thoughts, he would not have fallen into the hands of this group of people. The man continued to hit Xia Hanyang. Wei Wei Bai finally got up and stumbled over. She knelt beside Xia Hanyang, bent over and hugged him. Then she looked up and said, "He can talk. Don't hit him." Xia Hanyang trembled. She leaned on him with her whole body. If he punched her, it would fall on her. Xia Hanyang's mind, which had been occupied by anger, suddenly sobered up. He immediately admitted defeat. "I'm talking to my grandfather." For fear that Wei Wei Bai would be targeted, Xia Hanyang immediately got up from the ground and blocked Wei Wei Bai with his body. He picked up the phone and sure enough, it was his grandfather's voice. "Yang Yang, remember not to resist. Grandpa will save you."
"Grandpa."
Xia Hanyang swallowed the blood in his throat. His eyes were moist as he whispered, "Grandpa, I'm fine." Just as she finished speaking, her phone was snatched away. The man kicked Xia Hanyang again. This time it was a heavy kick. Xia Hanyang was stunned for a long time. Then the man walked out again. The door closed, and a faint sound could be heard. 80 million in cash, and that's a discount. If you don't pay, just wait to collect your corpse. Wei Wei Bai frowned and quickly pressed Xia Hanyang's abdomen. Xia Hanyang curled up into a ball and gasped in a low voice. Don't be afraid. They just want money. He was sweating from the pain. She pressed a hand on his forehead. Her fingers were cold to cool down his sweaty forehead. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, Shut up. Why were you so impulsive just now? As she spoke, Wei Wei Bai reached out to hold his head and put it on her thigh. Xia Hanyang saw that Wei Wei Bai didn't panic, and his muscles were a little tight and trembling. The pain made him grimace. Because he pushed you. What Xia Hanyang was most afraid of was that they would hurt Wei Wei Bai, or even take a fancy to Wei Wei Bai. Recently, Wei Wei Bai had been very cute because of him. He was worried that those people would take a fancy to her and hurt her. Wei Wei Bai wiped his sweat with her sleeve and said with her head down, I'm fine. You're protecting me. As soon as the sentence came out, she was deducted points again. But Xia Hanyang's eyes suddenly softened. He moved his lips. I'm afraid. The thunderstorm outside was getting heavier. Xia Hanyang's voice was filled with fear. I'm afraid that we will die here, and I'm afraid that they will be rude to you. This kind of thing had happened before. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly for a while. After all, he was a teenager. No matter how brave he was, of course he would be afraid. She suddenly whispered, Don't be afraid. It's okay. Xia Hanyang, I'm with you. She clasped his fingers with her hand. And for the first time, Xia Hanyang felt that she was so close to him. He thought that she didn't like him. She had always been cold. But now, his heart was filled with a huge surprise. If this wasn't love, then what was it? Xia Hanyang pulled out a smile, which was a little ugly and naive because of the pain. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 70. Wei Wei Bai, if you're really so afraid, let's do something else to divert your attention. Xia Hanyang stared at her lips and nodded excitedly. Then he saw Wei Wei Bai take out a small notebook and calmly say, I'm not afraid of memorizing the formula. There's still time. Let's review our homework quickly. Xia Hanyang. The fast, comma. Chapter 1895. Time was extremely hard to bear. Outside the window, the rainstorm continued. In the darkness, only the sound of the storm was very clear. On the contrary, Wei Wei Bai's voice was unusually weak and gentle, almost drowned out by the sound of the rainstorm. If x equals a, then x is the square root of a. If x equals a to the third power, then x is the cube root of a. She was very serious about reviewing junior high school basic questions for him. Xia Hanyang understood these. After all, he had been reviewing the knowledge of square roots and cube roots during this period of time. He had also read a lot of questions about this. She held a small notebook and read softly while reaching out to touch his hair and let his head rest on her soft thigh. This position made Xia Hanyang feel comfortable and safe. Even the fear of being kidnapped slowly calmed down. She was calm, tolerant, and gentle. Even when she was explaining the questions, he felt that she left a deeper impression on him than any other time. The hard floor with grit and dust, the damp air, and the old lights that were almost scrapped. There was also Wei Wei Bai's soft voice. It relieved the pain in Xia Hanyang's body. He half opened his eyes. His eyes were dark and bright, like a fire in the dark night, but also like flowing water. He stared at Wei Wei Bai like this. Wei Wei Bai didn't have much reaction. Instead, she calmly held a small notebook for reviewing and explained junior high school basic questions to him. Then she heard the top student index rise. Did this mean that Xia Hanyang could actually listen to her explanation in such a difficult environment? Originally, all her points had been deducted. If she was too gentle to Xia Hanyang again, she would be punished. But because Xia Hanyang listened to these questions and understood them, his top student index rose to 20. And she also got an extra 15 points as a reward. Bai Weiwei felt that when she was comfortable, she was going to give a lecture to the point where she had to hang up. Xia Hanyang hesitated to increase his top student index. However, when he came to the deep mountains and forests, his index rose automatically. What did this mean? It meant that Xia Hanyang, this fool, deserved a beating. In the future, would he find a godforsaken place where birds don't shit? The more difficult, the better. It would only be effective if he were to study for him. Bai Weiwei's mind ran through the nearby villages. Why don't they go to the countryside to study in the future? Xia Hanyang stared at Weiwei Bai's snow-white face, which was as white as a piece of pear pulp and ice. White and clear. During this period of time, he had really fed her until she was too cute. Otherwise, how could the number of love letters increase so quickly? He couldn't bear to let her change her hairstyle, and the clothes she chose were comfortable and inconspicuous. Because she was so adorable. If she were to dress up so meticulously, wouldn't she be attracting wild bees and flirtatious butterflies? Xia Hanyang would be tired if he held a fly swatter every day. However, he felt that the way Weiwei Bai looked at him was a little strange. It was so strange that it was cute. The people outside the door were very professional. It seemed that they had caught Xia Hanyang in passing. Weiwei Bai asked the system to keep an eye on it. Then, he would help Xia Hanyang with his revision. It was a good idea to calm Xia Hanyang down. After all, Xia Hanyang had a very bad temper. If he suddenly couldn't bear it and went against him, they would probably meet God early. Seeing that Xia Hanyang had calmed down, Weiwei Bai breathed a sigh of relief. However, the system suddenly said, "Think of a way to escape. These people want to kill the hostage." Weiwei Bai asked, "Why so sudden?" The system said, "Their address was discovered." They hid it very well, but Xia Hanyang not only has a GPS device on his watch, but he also has a GPS device on his sneakers. So, the Xia family still found him. At https://www.
Sashu.com/full
text at https://www.
Sashu.
Download text at https://www. Sashu. At https://m. Sashu. // Chapter 1896. They had hidden it well. They wanted to sneak into the wooden house, but these kidnappers were very professional. A guard at the door noticed something was wrong. These people were planning to kill them both. Weiwei Bai asked, "Why does Xia Hanyang have a bunch of GPS systems on him?" The system said, "His grandfather worries about him being kidnapped every day. The nanny would always put the GPS systems on his clothes, video, car, and all kinds of inconspicuous places. As long as Xia Hanyang was wearing clothes, riding a bike, or wearing any accessories, it was possible that there was something that could locate them. Xia Hanyang didn't know a lot of them." Weiwei Bai asked, "The lucky box can't save us?" The system sighed. "Who knows, this thing will only rain." After opening the lucky box, there was a thank you message, followed by a rainstorm. So they were unlucky and wasted 30 days of life points. Weiwei Bai frowned and looked at Xia Hanyang. With just the two of them, and without superpowers, it was impossible to escape from here. The house was too sturdy. She had observed the surroundings just now. There was no place to escape. The only place to hide was the cellar in this room. But after entering the cellar, they still couldn't escape. Xia Hanyang was listening to Weiwei Bai's soft lecture. But she suddenly went silent. Her delicate eyebrows furrowed, and there was a trace of uneasiness in her eyes. Xia Hanyang immediately stood up and reached out to hold her cold fingers. "What's wrong?" he asked in a low voice. Weiwei Bai couldn't tell him directly that the two of them were going to die. "Nothing, I just have a bad feeling." Xia Hanyang's heart twitched when he heard it. He felt terrible. Knowing the situation, Weiwei Bai couldn't really not be afraid no matter how calm she was. His fingers gripped her hand tightly. He whispered, "Don't be afraid, I'll protect you." When Xia Hanyang said this, he didn't act impulsively but very calmly. Weiwei Bai shook her head. They might kill us. Xia Hanyang pursed his lips tightly. He suddenly looked at the locked wooden door. When he was thrown in, he checked his surroundings with his eyes. It was the same conclusion as Wei Wei Bai. There was only a cellar here. Everything had been taken away. There was nothing left. That was why this group of people were so relieved to throw them together and didn't even bother to tie them up. After all, they didn't have any weapons on them. The people outside were all experienced criminals, all of them tall and strong. Furthermore, he was cautious and cruel. Xia Hanyang was not a real foppish playboy who had a hole in his head. As soon as he saw those people, he restrained himself, because he knew that he couldn't escape from so many experienced bad guys by himself. Not to mention, he had Wei Wei by his side. Xia Hanyang's palms were sweaty, but he was still calm. It's okay. They just want money. And I know they must have committed a big crime and planned to escape. I was caught by them, by the way, so they won't cause any trouble. These people only wanted money. He was very clear. It was definitely urgent for his family to raise 80 million in cash in one night. However, it was not an unbearable amount. Wei Wei Bai still wanted to say something. Suddenly, the door opened and two men wearing masks rushed in. Damn it, this little brat must not have been searched thoroughly. The closest car to us is only about 3 kilometers away. We're about to be found. Forget the money. Let's leave first. I told you not to catch this little brat. He's really causing trouble. Chapter 1897. The men were complaining to each other. One of the men had already walked in front of Xia Hanyang with a knife. His eyes were cold and calm. I'm sorry, kid. Your parents don't know what's good for you, so you have to pay the price. When Xia Hanyang heard their words, his pupils constricted violently. He knew that there must be something on him that could locate his location. Then, his grandfather came looking for him, wanting to rescue him before dawn. In the end, things were pushed to the point of no return. If he died, he would drag Wei Wei Bai down with him. He had not studied hard, he had not scored full marks, and he had not received Wei Wei Bai's reward. Wei Wei Bai had not entered university, she had not lived the good life he had given her, she had not married him, had children, and grew old together with him. In the end, the two of them were going to be buried here forever? Xia Hanyang thought of a lot of things in a flash, but when the knife came down, he was stunned. He had already dragged Wei Wei Bai to the side to avoid the knife. Then he saw the wooden planks in the cellar and planned to use force to lift the planks, wanting to push Wei Wei Bai down. Then he would press the planks so that the group of people could not hurt her. There was no lock on the planks in the cellar, so if they went down, they would not be able to hide. Wei Wei Bai knew what Xia Hanyang was thinking. What a hot-blooded young man. Although he was a bad student, his desire to protect and this sense of responsibility forcefully increased the favorability from 70 to 100. Wei Wei Bai felt that Xia Hanyang was not completely useless. Other than having a screw loose in his head, he was quite good. Wei Wei Bai was still looking for life-saving items with the system. The system said, most of the supermarkets are not open, they are all trash. Those that are useful are too expensive, they are worth 100 to 200,000 life points. Wei Wei Bai said, anything is fine. We are going to be buried together. The system said, only life support is left. When they spoke, it was only a short 1 or 2 seconds. Xia Hanyang didn't have time to open the board because another strong man rushed over and kicked him hard. Xia Hanyang hurriedly dodged and bumped into Wei Wei Bai. Bai Wei Wei staggered, and her whole body fell backwards. Behind her, the man with the knife had already come over and was about to stab Wei Wei Bai in the back. Xia Hanyang's pupils constricted, and his mind was torn apart. Wei Wei, dodge. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, but suddenly felt a vibration under the floor. Her body floated and brushed past the knife. The tip of the knife brushed past her clothes, but it didn't hurt her. Then, she fell heavily to the ground. Xia Hanyang threw caution to the wind and rushed over to hold her in his arms. The two of them rolled into a ball. The shaking of the floor was getting more and more obvious. The men in the room frowned. What's going on? It looks like an earthquake? Xia Hanyang also felt the unusual vibration under the floor. Moreover, in the midst of the torrential rain, an incomparable rumbling sound could be heard. It sounded like it came from the sky, from a relatively distant place. It was getting closer and closer. The system said loudly in Wei Wei Bai's ear, "Don't move, don't move. There's a mudslide in the storm." Wei Wei Bai was shocked. What the hell? What's with this sudden disaster? The men's expressions changed, and a strong sense of crisis made them run for the door. "Let's go. It's an earthquake." This was not a joke. It was not uncommon for a real earthquake to be crushed to death by a house.
T.
Chapter 1898. Xia Hanyang also felt the vibration of the earthquake. His face was a little pale. He held Wei Wei Bai tightly and said, "Let's run away, too." He pulled her and rushed to the door. But the door was locked, and the group of men were about to open the door of the cabin and run out. Boom! A beam collapsed. Just outside the door in the hall. 1/3 of the cabin was broken. 2 people were killed on the spot. Seeing the scene, Xia Hanyang knew that the collapse of the cabin would soon affect this small cabin. He stepped back and raised his foot to kick the door hard. These bastards locked him and Wei Wei Bai so that the cabin would collapse and kill them. And there was a benefit to being buried in this ruin. To save people, his grandfather would not track them down. The door was too strong. They did not cut corners at all. Xia Hanyang's legs were numb. He only left a mark on the door, but he still could not kick it open. Wei Wei Bai heard the prompt of the system. "Hurry up and stand in the area I calculated, on the plank that covers the cellar. Stand there." Xia Hanyang intended to continue to kick the door, but Bai Weiwei recklessly dragged him towards the wooden plank. Xia Hanyang frowned. "Weiwei, we have to open the door and get out." He thought that Wei Wei Bai was frightened and ran around. Wei Wei Bai did not explain. She ran directly to the plank under the cellar and then held his waist tightly, not letting him move. "Believe me, Xia Hanyang, don't move if you don't want to die." Her voice was very anxious. Xia Hanyang paused. Seeing the nervous expression on her face, he even began to sweat on her forehead. He moved his lips, but in fact, he was so nervous that his muscles were twitching. But he was a man, so he did not dare to reveal his fear too much. He suddenly hugged her. In the sound of the room collapsing, the dust of the plank began to fly in the cabin. "Wei Wei, I'm sorry." His voice was a little choked up. "I'm the one who dragged you into this. If we can get out of here alive, I'll promise you anything you want." Bai Weiwei was pressed against his chest, and the two of them were pressed very close together. They almost merged into one. Their body temperatures intertwined, and fear and trembling were also transmitted to each other. Wei Wei Bai reached out and hugged his waist, whispering, "Trust me, nothing will happen." Xia Hanyang didn't believe it and was about to say something. Rumble. An intense sound pierced through his eardrums. A terrifying mudslide smashed through the house and rushed over. Xia Hanyang's back was injured by several planks, but it wasn't serious. He just felt a little pain. His bones were not broken. Xia Hanyang groaned. The sound behind him was like the roar of a monster, which was horrifying. He turned around and saw a terrifying scene. A powerful mudslide just happened to pass through more than half of the house, and the place where they were standing was just right, without being affected. It was crazy, a godlike miracle. The people who caught them just now were basically buried by the mudslide. Xia Hanyang couldn't help but ask in a trembling voice, "What's going on? We're fine." Wei Wei Bai said, "The speed of the mudslide has a summary formula. As long as we calculate it in advance, we know where it's going and also know where it's safe. System." To make the male lead learn, the host had gone to the point of insanity. Even Superman couldn't calculate the mudslide formula like this. Xia Hanyang felt that learning was such a divine tool. The system finally couldn't stand it. "Stop learning, run." It worked so hard to find a safe place for them, but was it easy? These two learning bitches had enough. Wei Wei Bai nodded and was about to pull Xia Hanyang away. The system suddenly said, "It's too late." The magic power of the Geely box was up. It couldn't last until they were safe. The house completely collapsed. Wei Wei Bai and Xia Hanyang's place was not safe either. Wei Wei Bai pushed Xia Hanyang out almost instantly. Fortunately, there was no more mudslide, otherwise, Xia Hanyang would have died when she pushed him out. All the houses collapsed in the violent rain. His whole body was smashed by stones and wood, but he didn't suffer the most terrible burial. Xia Hanyang crouched on the broken house, but saw Wei Wei Bai buried under the broken wood. Her fingers hung limply on a piece of splintered wood, and blood flowed from her wrist. Xia Hanyang's body was cold, his mind blank. He suddenly crawled over, trembling, and grabbed her hand tightly. Wei Wei? Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai was buried under. She was stuck in a crack, but she didn't die. She weakly responded. Xia Hanyang suddenly trembled, his heart aching as he looked at the blood all over the ground. He broke out with unimaginable strength, desperately reaching out to the wood and stones, and shouted in a trembling voice, hold on, live for me, Wei Wei Bai." Wei Wei Bai's voice was so broken that it was almost inaudible. "Xia Hanyang, go." In fact, it was not safe here. Under the heavy rain, the mudslide could happen again. Xia Hanyang was hysterical. "I won't go. You have to live for me. As long as you live, I will listen to you." Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment, and then said weakly, "What will listen to me?" Xia Hanyang burst into tears. I'll listen to you. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled. "Then you study hard, Xia Hanyang." Poof! He finally couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. /
T.
Chapter 1899. It was not because of anger but because Xia Hanyang had been hit by the stone, so he had a blood clot in his body. He was so agitated that he spat out blood. There was probably something wrong with his internal organs. He didn't know where he was in pain, but his eyes were red as he stared at the person under the stone. He couldn't see her, but he could see her hand through a gap. The blood she spilled was washed away by the rainstorm. But Xia Hanyang was even more frightened. He trembled all over, not knowing whether it was because of cold or fear. His heart sank. He was in extreme pain, but he was numb and sober. His lips trembled and he said in a hoarse voice, "Wei Wei, you have to hold on for me. As long as you're fine, I'll study hard, memorize formulas, and write essays. I won't skip class, I won't be rewarded, and I won't be distracted." Xia Hanyang's hands were covered with blood. He couldn't open the ruins of a house alone. Especially when he encountered a huge support beam. He couldn't carry the wood alone. Bai Weiwei had long since lost her breath. Her hands didn't move at all. Her soft fingers were stained with blood and soaked in the rain. Xia Hanyang suddenly reached out to support his chest. He was in so much pain that he couldn't continue. He knew that he had to leave. He had to leave here and ask for help. If he didn't move these things away, Wei Wei would die. Xia Hanyang had such a clear idea in his mind, but another terrible force tore him apart. He couldn't move his feet to leave. What if she was already dead? This idea gripped his mind and chest tightly, making him want to cry, but he couldn't. She was buried in the dark ground alone. How desperate it must be. Xia Hanyang used all his strength to reach out and touch her outstretched fingers covered with blood. Finally, his fingertips touched her fingers. The cold fingertips intensified the uneasiness in his heart. Xia Hanyang couldn't help but whisper, "Wei Wei." Her fingers trembled. Xia Hanyang paused and realized that she was not dead. But she was so weak that she couldn't speak. Xia Hanyang forced himself to calm down and said loudly, "Wei Wei, listen to me. I'm going to find someone to save you. You must hold on and don't fall asleep, okay?" His voice was hoarse from all the shouting, his throat burning with pain. Wei Wei Bai was silent. Then, she seemed to use all her strength to force out a voice. He hummed softly. It was almost suppressed by the sound of the torrential rain. Xia Hanyang trembled all over. His brain was about to explode. She was still alive. Furthermore, he was still conscious. As long as they quickly moved these things away, there would definitely be hope of saving her. Xia Hanyang clenched his teeth so hard that they almost bled. With all his strength, He finally shouted, "Wait for me." After he finished speaking, he immediately rushed out from the ruins, the broken stones, and the torrential rain. He needed to find someone. His grandfather's men must be nearby. He must be here. Otherwise, that group of people wouldn't have escaped so quickly. Therefore, as long as they could find someone nearby to save them, they would be saved. Xia Hanyang saw a black car parked not far away. It belonged to the kidnappers. They were all buried by the mudslide, but one of the cars was still intact.
Drive.
This thought made him start to feel afraid. He opened the car door. Fortunately, the car key was not unplugged. But when he sat in the driver's seat, he suddenly fell into a terrible depression. His fingers trembled as he touched the key. He had almost no strength left. Xia Hanyang began to have difficulty breathing. He reached out to cover his eyes and kept hypnotizing himself. Chapter 1900. You can drive, you can drive. Yes, he could drive. To heal himself, he had to scrap a few cars before he finally managed to improve his driving skills. But he still did not dare to drive himself. Xia Hanyang sat in the driver's seat every time. He would remember the car accident when he was young. On the day of the accident, he was not old enough to drive. His legs were short and he could not even touch the brakes. But his parents spoiled him and let him drive at the steadiest and slowest speed. They watched from the side, and nothing would happen. No one knew that a truck would suddenly rush out. When his father turned the steering wheel, it was too late. The sound of the car being overturned still rang in his painful bones. The blood on the ground had left a terrible impression on his mind. From then on, whenever he sat in the driver's seat, his body would be cold, as if he had returned to the most helpless and painful time. He did not dare to drive the car far. The only thing that allowed him to drive without obstacles was the motorcycle and the two-wheeled ones. So even if he forced himself to learn how to drive, he still could not overcome his psychological barrier. Xia Hanyang was almost lying on the steering wheel, his mind full of the day he killed his parents. He covered his face with his hands and tried his best to drive, but his hands and feet were still stiff. He suddenly smelled blood on his fingers. He suddenly woke up. This was Wei Wei Bai's blood. He touched the blood on her fingers. She was still waiting for him. Xia Hanyang almost burst out with unimaginable strength. He stepped on the accelerator and drove the car in a crooked manner. The car passed through the dark night storm and rushed into the small path in the dense forest. He remembered what Wei Wei Bai told him. The sound of the stream, if they followed the sound, they would reach the main road. Wei Wei Bai was lying in the gap, her face covered in dust. She did not know where she was in pain because of the life support. She could not feel pain. The system said, "I didn't know that opening the ghillie box would result in a mudslide." This thing depended on luck. When the mudslide came down, the entire house should have been buried. In the end, the mudslide rushed through half of the house in an extremely strange posture. He killed all the kidnappers. The system also saw that the direction of the mudslide was really strange, so it let Xia Hanyang and Wei Wei Bai stand on the wooden planks of the cellar. That was because the wooden plank happened to be the innermost end of the house, where the mudslide would not bury it. In the end, the house still collapsed. Only Xia Hanyang went out. But that's right, they said that the chances of being saved is 50%. Now Xia Hanyang had gone out. Wei Wei Bai was buried. Indeed, there was only a 50% chance of survival. Wei Wei Bai, how's my injury? The system replied, I'm fine. It's just that I bled a little too much. My stomach was pierced by a piece of wood, but I'll be fine as long as I don't move. Because if he moved, the tip of the wooden stick that pierced his stomach would fall off. Then, blood would really flow out. Wei Wei Bai was lying in the gap between two pieces of wood. As long as the wood did not fall off, she could hide in the triangular gap and wait for help. She could probably hold on until dawn. Wei Wei Bai, did Xia Hanyang find him? The system replied, he drove the car to find him, they'll meet soon. When Wei Wei Bai heard that, she knew that there was no problem. She lay down and closed her eyes. Then I'll sleep first to replenish my energy. She was really tired. To let Xia Hanyang, a bad student, have the strong willpower of a top student. The.
The.
Chapter 1901. She really risked her life. When she was rescued, Xia Hanyang would have to do 3 times the exam questions. Otherwise, how could he compensate her for her selfless good character? With this sleep, Bai Weiwei was completely unconscious. The life guarantee could only guarantee that she would not die. But her physical symptoms would not disappear. Weiwei Bai had lost too much blood. The system silently calculated the time, knowing that she would be fine before Xia Hanyang came back. Then it continued to guard her silently. When Xia Hanyang finally saw the car in front of him along the stream, he relaxed his whole body, and the car rushed over at once. The people who came to find Xia Hanyang were very anxious. The surrounding area was surrounded by the Xia family. When they saw Xia Hanyang's car, at first, some people didn't realize it and wanted to stop his car. But the next moment, Xia Hanyang had stopped the car and stuck his head out of the car window. He was in a mess, his wet hair sticking to his forehead, and his eyes were fierce and sad. "Follow me. Let's save her." Then, without another word, he turned the car around and immediately ran in Bai Weiwei's direction. Those people immediately followed after him. It was not easy to find Xia Hanyang. They couldn't lose him. The rain gradually stopped. Xia Hanyang ran to the ruins with a group of people. Broken wood, mud, and stones all over the ground. Xia Hanyang knelt on the ground and lifted the wood with others. At first, there were only 7 or 8 people. But soon, Xia Hanyang called all the people in the vicinity who could be called over. Xia Hanyang's grandfather also came after hearing the news that his grandson had been found. He sat in the car and saw his grandson in a mess from a distance. His clothes were dirty, his pants were tattered, and there was not a piece of good flesh on his body. But he desperately tried to dig out Weiwei Bai from the ruins. No one could stop him in his desperate madness. Xia Hanyang's grandfather, Xia San, waved his hand. He asked someone to help. He was going to stop Xia Hanyang. But when he saw Xia Hanyang's violent and desperate face, Xia San suddenly didn't say anything. He sighed softly. "She's not your little lover. She's more like your little sweetheart." This was placing him at the top of his heart. Otherwise, how could he risk everything to save someone? Finally, the log was lifted and Xia Hanyang saw her. Her body was sprawled on the ground full of broken wood. Her hair had fallen into the dirty, muddy water, and her face was so pale that it looked like she was dead. Xia Hanyang didn't react for a while. He just stared at her blankly. Then he finally woke up and stumbled over. The ambulance had arrived a long time ago. When the doctor saw the scene, he immediately stopped them. He was afraid that Xia Hanyang would hurt him again. But it was too late. Xia Hanyang carefully hugged Weiwei Bai. She was so soft, but this kind of softness was a kind of deathly softness, with a hint of coldness. There was no trace of warmth. Xia Hanyang didn't even dare to reach out to feel her breath. He whispered, "Weiwei, I'm here." Weiwei Bai leaned against his chest. She did not move at all. Xia Hanyang finally couldn't stand it anymore. His fingers trembled violently, and he wanted to touch her neck to hear her heartbeat. But in the next moment, Weiwei Bai seemed to come back. She gasped for breath and opened her trembling eyelashes. Xia Hanyang's face was reflected in her hazy eyes. She twitched the corner of her mouth. "You're back." Her voice was so fragile that it was almost inaudible. Xia Hanyang stared at her in a daze, and the tears he had held back all night finally came out. He put his face on her cold hair and said with a trembling voice, "I'm back. Weiwei, I'm back." She was still alive. This fact saved him. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 85. Download the at https://m Sashu. COMT. Chapter 1902. Parting in Life and Death, Experiencing Great Pain and Emotion Together. It finally broke through the cold and hard depths of Xia Hanyang's heart. It pulled out all his feelings. At this moment, he only had eyes for Weiwei Bai. In this disaster, both Weiwei Bai and Xia Hanyang were injured. Wei Wei Bai was more seriously injured and was directly pushed into the operating room. Because of the piece of wood in her stomach, her intestines were almost broken. One of Xia Hanyang's ribs was broken. It almost pierced his internal organs. It was very dangerous. He even drove to call someone to save Wei Wei Bai with such terrible pain. But after he was discovered, when he was pulled into the operating room, he still jumped around and shouted, "Look after Wei Wei for me. Don't let anything happen to those quacks. If anything happens, I'll bury you with her." These were childish lines. It made people's faces twitch. When Bai Weiwei finally woke up, she saw the patient next to her in the bed. Xia Hanyang was irritable and restless. His upper body was naked and covered with thick bandages. When he saw her wake up, he relaxed. He struggled to reach out, trying to get up from the bed and come to her side. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare to move. She frowned and looked at him. "Don't move, Xia Hanyang. Do you want to die?" Xia Hanyang didn't dare to move. He looked at her sideways, pursed his lips, and suddenly shouted, "Are you an idiot?" "Wei Wei Bai," Xia Hanyang said, "why did you push me away at that time? You will die, you know?" He thought about it. If Wei Wei Bai didn't push him away, but ran away by herself, she definitely wouldn't have been hit by the wooden beam in the room. Wei Wei Bai thought about it seriously and said, "I didn't think so much. In fact, I thought a lot." At least she had a system to protect her. If Xia Hanyang stayed in the ruins, she didn't know whether he could survive. If he died, it would be troublesome. Hearing this answer, Xia Hanyang was stunned and didn't speak for a long time. Only then did he believe that Wei Wei Bai liked him. Her answer was as if she loved him to the bone. Only love that transcended her instincts could make her make the decision to save him in such a dangerous time, without caring about herself. The more he didn't think too much about it, the more she loved him, the more she loved him. Xia Hanyang's heartbeat became irregular again. He struggled to reach out his hand to cover his chest. His heartbeat was so fast that it was as if he had a heart attack. Xia Hanyang looked at Wei Wei Bai and found that her eyes were closed again. She seemed to be asleep. But he couldn't control his panic and immediately rang the bell for the nurse. While she was asleep, he called the nurse several times. Let the nurse take a look at her. He was afraid that she would worsen. When that piece of wood was taken out of her stomach, it was said that her intestines almost burst. Her body was weak to begin with. After this calamity, who knew how long it would take to recover? The nurse and the doctor ran over. This was the largest ward in the hospital. No one could stop Xia Hanyang because he wanted to be in the same ward as Wei Wei Bai even if he died. Furthermore, they did not dare to stop him. After all, she was injured now. Who could bear the responsibility if something happened to her? After the doctor checked her, he said, "She's fine. It's just that the patient is too tired. Let her rest." After that, he talked about a lot of taboos in detail. Xia Hanyang remembered all of them. Wei Wei Bai lay in a daze for a few days before she could finally eat some liquid food. Xia Hanyang was young and strong, so he recovered very quickly. He was in a wheelchair and could move around. He made a post-operative nutrition list for her. He hired several caregivers to watch over her. Wei Wei Bai could barely sit up. Xia Hanyang was so happy that he wanted to set off firecrackers. He asked the nanny to take out the thermos and then poured out a light soup. He watched the nanny feed her. He also wanted to do it himself, but his fracture was not healed, and he could not take care of her. After Xia Hanyang had encountered a major disaster, his mobility had become much stronger. His attitude towards her was no longer ambiguous. Instead, he was straightforward. His eyes were clear and sharp, with bright gentleness, when he looked at her. His feelings were really deep in his heart. The young man's feelings changed from floating romance to real affection. After Bai Weiwei finished eating, Xia Hanyang scooped up the rice himself. Then he sat in the wheelchair and stayed by the bed to talk to Weiwei Bai. They were all jokes and interesting news. It made Weiwei Bai feel better. Weiwei Bai found it interesting and couldn't help laughing. Then she fell asleep in a daze. In a trance, a kiss seemed to fall gently on the corner of her lips. When she woke up again, She found Xia Hanyang holding his face with one hand and looking down at the book spread on his lap expressionlessly. He was still holding a pen in his hand and seemed to be calculating something. Wei Wei Bai asked casually, "What are you doing?" Xia Hanyang looked up and smiled. "I'm studying, Wei Wei. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time, if you like." Chapter 1903. The male lead's academic genius index has broken through 50, and his perseverance in learning has been cultivated. The host is rewarded with 100 academic genius index points. Wei Wei Bai heard the reminder, and her sleepy mind was awake. She immediately asked the system, "It's only been a few days, and Xia Hanyang's score is already 50? Does that mean he got 50 or 60 marks in the exam?" The system said, "No. How could he review so quickly? It's his learning mentality that has changed." The side mission determined that his current mentality can make his score soar, so his academic genius index points increased. Wei Wei Bai, the learning mentality is indeed a cheat for people who study. If a person has a persevering learning mentality, as long as they are not mentally retarded, their grades will improve. Seeing that she was awake, Xia Hanyang immediately threw the book aside and reached out to adjust the drip bottle. There was still a lot of liquid on it. It had already been changed once. Xia Hanyang was guarding it. Wei Wei Bai struggled to get up. Xia Hanyang wanted to reach out, but found that he could not exert any strength. The disaster this time was too big. The identities of the dozen or so bad people buried in the mudslide had also been revealed. It was a very professional criminal group. He had already committed many terrible crimes. This time, they fell into Wei Wei Bai and Xia Hanyang's hands, which was also an accident. After the accident, the news said that they had committed too many sins and were struck by lightning. Xia Hanyang only briefly explained the news once and did not go into details. He was afraid of scaring Wei Wei Bai. After Wei Wei Bai got up, she whispered to Xia Hanyang, "How are you studying?" Xia Hanyang immediately reached out and took the book from just now. "I've read everything you said. I was solving a fractional equation just now, transforming it into a linear equation with one element. This was the mathematics foundation of junior high school. Recently, when Xia Hanyang was doing questions, he did not get to this point. But he took the initiative to do it." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and could not help but smile. When she smiled, Xia Hanyang did not say anything, but just stared at her blankly. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, "I'm in a bit of pain. Come closer, I'll help you with your revision." Xia Hanyang's heart was still beating fast. He immediately put his wheelchair beside the bed and held a book in his hand. He no longer rejected learning. His sense of responsibility had completely taken over his heart the moment he pushed her into the ruins. She wanted him to study hard. He would not deliberately act shamelessly. Instead, he would seriously review these things that seemed to be useless and very boring in the past. Actually, it wasn't that boring to revise and study, because he had taken the initiative to learn more. Some of the questions were actually quite fun to solve. Xia Hanyang opened the book and pointed to the question. "Is this the right way to solve this question?" He wrote down the solution at the bottom of the book. It was the same as the notes. Xia Hanyang's handwriting was not ugly. It was flamboyant and flamboyant. It was said that he had practiced calligraphy when he was young. Although he had abandoned it later on, it had laid a foundation for him, allowing him to write beautifully. Wei Wei Bai looked at him seriously. Suddenly, she leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. A light and soft kiss. When their breaths intertwined, it was as if lilies had fallen between their breaths. Xia Hanyang opened his mouth slightly. He was a little confused. Wei Wei Bai left his lips. Her hazy eyes were full of tenderness. "It's your reward." Xia Hanyang moved his lips. Suddenly, he let go of the book in his hand. He reached out to hold her face and was about to kiss her. Wei Wei Bai reached out and pressed his lips with her fingers. She said seriously, "Review homework."
Button.
Chapter 1904. Xia Hanyang was afraid that something would happen to her, so he followed her wherever she went. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes at the sight of a thick physics book. It was just right for Xia Hanyang to read. She reached out and touched the book. Xia Hanyang stretched out his long arm and took the book out. Do you want to read this book? Just tell me, and I'll take it. Wei Wei Bai said, Yes, I'll show it to you. Xia Hanyang held the thick physics book calmly and even felt a little touched. Yes, I'll definitely read it. Not only will I read it, but I'll also work hard to study it thoroughly. Wei Wei Bai was speechless for a moment when she heard this. Then she said, You don't have to study it thoroughly. This can help you understand the application of some formulas in physics class. If he really studied it thoroughly, would he be like Newton or Einstein? Xia Hanyang nodded seriously. I'll remember it. Also, you can leave me more homework. Anyway, I can't jump or run now. I can only stay at home with you and read books and do practice questions. Wei Wei Bai was speechless for a while again. She leaned sideways against the bookshelf and looked at him strangely. Xia Hanyang held the book. His hair fell softly in front of his forehead, and his thin lips were slightly curved under his delicate nose. He looked indescribably gentle. The sharpness in his eyes remained unchanged, but there was a sense of clarity. It felt as if he had been reborn overnight. Indeed, people would grow up after experiencing some disasters. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but kiss him softly. Have you really fallen in love with studying? Under her gaze, Xia Hanyang's body heated up and his heart pounded wildly. He leaned close to her, pressed her against the bookshelf little by little, and then slowly hugged her. He was afraid that he would hurt her wound, so he didn't dare to hug her tightly. His chin gently fell on her hair. Her soft hair was next to his chin. He finally sighed in satisfaction. Who fell in love with studying? I fell in love with. Her name rolled in his mouth several times, but he suddenly realized that he couldn't say it. Xia Hanyang was silent for a while before he said slowly, I'll confess when I'm ready in the future. He didn't dare to say that he loved her. At least, he couldn't say it now, because they were still young. And love was a responsibility. He was afraid that she wouldn't believe him if he said it too early. During this time, Xia Hanyang also stopped Xia San from visiting Wei Wei Bai. He was not a fool. He knew that his grandfather's gaze was not that kind. He was afraid that those melodramatic TV dramas where he gave Wei Wei Bai millions of checks to make her leave him would happen. Xia Hanyang had really put in a lot of effort. Every time his grandfather appeared, he would definitely appear. He did not allow him to get close to Wei Wei Bai. It wasn't easy for him to catch her. It wasn't easy for her to like him. Was it easy? His grandfather looked like a villain. He would be blind if he turned a blind eye to it. Wei Wei Bai did not move, nor did she hug him back. Instead, she frowned and looked at him with disdain. This was used to deal with side quests. Xia Hanyang was only 50 years old, and he was still a bad student. Therefore, when he approached her, it was best for her to show disdain so that she wouldn't be deducted points. Then she saw the nanny at the door walk over, and their eyes met. The nanny seemed a little surprised by the calmness and coldness in her eyes. Wei Wei Bai immediately lowered her eyelashes and did not reveal any emotions. The weather turned cold later, and the temperature of the winter vacation was very low. Xia Hanyang asked the nanny to make soup for Wei Wei Bai, for fear that it could not nourish her health. She didn't look healthy at all. It made Xia Hanyang worried to death. Wei Wei Bai did not say anything. As long as Xia Hanyang studied hard, she would not do too much unnecessary things. So, half of the winter vacation was over. Xia Hanyang was shocked. He had reviewed most of the lessons in junior high school.
T.
Chapter 1905. Wei Wei Bai gave him the test papers. His highest score was an average of 89. The highest scores were in mathematics, physics, English, and chemistry. Not counting the deduction of essay marks, he basically got full marks for English. Xia Hanyang's learning ability was very impressive when he was willing and gave it his all. His academic genius index also slowly rose to 60. This proved that Xia Hanyang was already a passing flunky. The look in Bai Weiwei's eyes became motherly, benevolent, and gentle. She finally didn't have to tire herself out watching Xia Hanyang study. It was really convenient and relaxing. And because of their interaction, Xia Hanyang's favorability rose to 90. Everything was going smoothly. Wei Wei, I'll be out for a day tomorrow, and we'll be back at night. Xia Hanyang finished the test papers and began to flip through the answers to score himself. He couldn't tire Wei Wei Bai out. So now, he didn't let her teach too many lessons. He studied by himself and asked questions when he didn't understand. He finished the homework and corrected the answers by himself.
It was the same for the test papers.
This made Wei Wei Bai much more relaxed. Wei Wei Bai held the soup bowl and slowly drank the Chinese medicine soup. She was still taking medicine. Although the wound on her stomach was not fatal, it was very torturous. If she didn't recuperate well, there would be sequelae in the future. So Xia Hanyang watched her take the medicine very closely. Wei Wei Bai asked, "Are you going out?" Xia Hanyang corrected the test papers. "Yes, I need to take care of the amusement park. There are many chores at the end of the year." The amusement park was his own business. It had nothing to do with his family. Especially the entertainment facilities on the cruise ship, the profits were very substantial. This time, he was going to start eliminating some of the dark industries. After all, Wei Wei Bai was going to raise him in the future. With her personality, she definitely wouldn't like him to cheat. Xia Hanyang felt that he would definitely become a good and upright entrepreneur. He wanted her to be proud of him. Of course, this wish was hidden in his heart. It would be too stupid to say it out loud. Wei Wei Bai nodded. "Okay, let's do more questions today to make up for tomorrow's blanks." Xia Hanyang complained, "You only remember to answer the questions. You don't even encourage and comfort me when I go out." Although he said that, he still took out his notes and planned to do some questions. Wei Wei Bai watched him mark the papers neatly, so she opened the mobile app and began to browse the question bank. From the looks of it, her high school revision would probably go smoothly by the next semester. Wei Wei Bai continued to drink the soup. Accompanied by the faint aroma of traditional Chinese medicine, she watched Xia Hanyang do his homework unhurriedly. The next day, Xia Hanyang was about to leave. Wei Wei Bai gave him a thermos and then stood on tiptoe to tidy up his collar. Being so close to her, Xia Hanyang blushed happily. Wei Wei Bai said, "I made lunch with the nanny this morning."
"Take it."
Xia Hanyang couldn't help but ask, "Is this a love bento?" Wei Wei Bai almost rolled her eyes at him. "I didn't want to waste the leftovers, so I asked you to take them with you." Xia Hanyang laughed. "It's okay. Even if you only warm the leftovers, I like to eat them." Wei Wei Bai waved her hand disdainfully. "Get lost. Come back early." Xia Hanyang happily got into the car with a thermos in his arms. Wei Wei Bai counted the days with her fingers. After the winter vacation, it would be the last semester. After the mock exam, it would be the college entrance examination. After the college entrance examination, her task would be almost complete and she could go home. This time it went smoothly. Wei Wei Bai smiled with satisfaction. However, halfway through her smile, she saw a black car driving up. Master Xia also came out of the car. He was dressed in old casual clothes and cloth shoes. He was in good spirits and looked very healthy. "You're the darling of that stinky brat of mine?" He walked in, swaggered to the sofa, and waved at Wei Wei Bai. "Girl, come here and let me have a look." Wei Wei Bai calmly walked over and said politely, "Hello." Xia-san gestured for her to sit down and asked the nanny to make tea for him. Wolfberry chrysanthemum tea. Add more wolfberry. After Wei Wei Bai sat down, Xia-san handed her a check. She looked down. It was 5 million yuan. Xia-san didn't mind and said, "Take this money. My little brat has troubled you during this time." Wei Wei Bai took the check and reacted belatedly. "So this is?" The system replied while chewing on the biscuits. "This is a classic scene from a melodramatic drama. Throw the check and leave my grandson." Wei Wei Bai said, "So old-fashioned. If he gave me more money, I might have nodded." Xia-san saw Wei Wei Bai holding the check calmly and frowned. Suddenly, he took out another check. "That brat is so troublesome. I'll give you more compensation for mental distress." A check of 2 million yuan was handed to Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, who was holding 7 million yuan, was speechless. She suddenly wanted to agree to what was going on. Grandpa Xia was so generous that it was adorable. Chapter 1906. Grandpa Xia's eyebrows twitched even more when he saw her expressionless face. He said meaningfully, "Young people have to fight for themselves. You can't dream of reaching the sky in one step, and you can't be too greedy. If you're too greedy, you'll lose your life." Was this a threat? Wei Wei Bai held the check and thought expressionlessly. If she didn't agree, she would probably be dragged to be filled with cement and pushed into the Pacific Ocean. The strategy would definitely fail. Grandpa Xia finally took out another check. His grandson was indeed interested in her. She was a woman who could successfully seduce his grandson. She was calm and tolerant enough. She wasn't afraid. He put the last check in her hand. "This is the last one. Don't be so shameless." Wei Wei Bai took a look. 3 million. So Grandpa Xia's bottom line was 10 million. But it was painful. So he divided it into 3 checks. He planned to give her another one if she couldn't be bought. However, she was expressionless, and Grandpa Xia thought she was unmoved. He squeezed out the last 3 million. This made it impossible for him to save money. Grandpa Xia's eyes turned cold. He slowly clenched his fingers and was about to show his cold side. He said, "You know what I mean, and I know that you have a big plan. I know that you've been urging Yang Yang to learn." Learning was a good thing. But who was Grandpa Xia? A person who grew up in a storm of knives and swords must have a much more complicated mind. Xia Hanyang's drive now was the most similar to his when he was young. She was also his only heir. By the time Bai Weiwei appeared, the old man had already figured out her background. It was impossible to say that someone who climbed out of such a poor place was innocent and pitiful. Grandpa Xia didn't believe in silly girls. Wei Wei Bai urged Xia Hanyang to learn for only one purpose. She wanted to marry him in the future. If it was just to get money from Xia Hanyang, she wouldn't have seriously molded him. If it weren't for this mudslide, she would have seen clearly how deep Xia Hanyang's feelings for her were. In fact, Grandpa Sheng still wanted to keep Wei Wei Bai and let her continue to urge Xia Hanyang to learn, mature and sensible. However, when he found out that his grandson had crawled out from the ruins alone, endured the pain of his chest fracture, and personally drove a car to look for someone, he was shocked. He knew he couldn't go on like this. So many psychologists couldn't do anything about Xia Hanyang's psychological shadow. For Wei Wei Bai, he was willing to risk his life, not to mention the psychological trauma. If he didn't come and end this ill-fated relationship, it would be difficult in the future. Old Master Xia looked at Wei Wei Bai indifferently. She was holding the check calmly. He didn't seem to be moved at all. When the tea was served, the old man took a sip of it slowly. He seemed to be giving Wei Wei Bai some time to think. After more than 10 minutes, the old man was almost done with his tea. Finally, he sighed and said, "Let my grandson go. You don't love him. You can't marry him as long as I'm here. It's better to take the money and leave than to have nothing in the end." Wei Wei Bai finally looked up. Her eyes were very calm. "I don't love him?" Old Master Xiao looked at her cold eyes and finally put down the teacup. "I'm old and experienced. You can't fool me. You don't love my grandson. If you love him, I won't stop you." Old Master Xia had enough money. If Xia Hanyang really liked someone, it didn't matter if they were poor. They didn't rely on the marriage alliance.
/T.
Chapter 1907. However, there was one condition that old Master Xia couldn't relax. That woman had to love Xia Hanyang. He combined all the information given by the nanny and his own observation. Wei Wei Bai didn't have any feelings for Xia Hanyang. To be precise, her feelings weren't deep enough to love him. How could he tolerate that the woman Xia Hanyang loved so much didn't give his grandson any feelings? Xia Hanyang was his most beloved family member and the child he had to protect. Old Master Xia couldn't tolerate such an indifferent Wei Wei Bai marrying Xia Hanyang. He looked at Wei Wei Bai, who seemed to be hesitating, and finally added weight. "If you don't leave, I can only call the police to make you leave. Maybe you'll spend the rest of your life in prison." Wei Wei Bai's eyes finally trembled. She clenched the check in her hand and moved her lips. Finally, she spat out a few words. You know. Old Master Xia nodded. Did you, or my grandson, kill him? How could I not investigate clearly? If you don't let go, I'll send you to where you belong. This old man really came prepared. Xia Hanyang was still too inexperienced to have a devil's grandfather behind him. It was no wonder that he could be so lawless and arrogant despite being such a bad student. After all, the guardian angel of the family was really awesome. Wei Wei Bai sighed and finally let go of her hand. Then she spread out the 3 checks. Her attitude was calm and indifferent, as if 10 million didn't matter. Then, she casually put the checks in a book and said softly, I accept your proposal. I really don't love him. I will leave him. Old Master Xia clenched his fingers and seemed to be a little tense. He hadn't seen such a calm child in a long time. She was the same age as Xia Hanyang, but 100 times more mature than him. If it weren't for the fact that she didn't love Xia Hanyang. She and Xia Hanyang were very compatible and complementary. Old Master Xia said, What do you want? Wei Wei Bai looked up. Yes, I will leave him after the college entrance examination, so please let me stay with him for a few months. The old man asked, What is your purpose? Wei Wei Bai finally smiled, a helpless smile. It wasn't easy for me to make him understand his responsibilities and how to learn. I want to see my results. Her fingers slowly touched the math textbook with the check in it. I spent a lot of effort to make him sensible. I have to experience the sweet taste of the moment when the youth I teach succeeds. The old man frowned, seemingly unable to understand her words. Are you treating my grandson as a work of art? And to experience the sweet taste of success? It sounded terrifying. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. No, I just think it's fun. After all, to be able to train a little tyrant into a good young man who loves to learn, it's really a sense of achievement, isn't it? The old man finally understood what she meant. She was treating his grandson as a mission or a game. Then, Xia Hanyang finally became a sensible child as she wished. She was satisfied. The old man said a little angrily, What do you think my grandson is? Wei Wei Bai stood up with the book in her hand and looked at him coldly. Old Mr. Xia, this is my only request. After the college entrance examination, I will completely disappear in front of him. The old man hesitated for a while before sighing. Okay, I agree. Because this would minimize the damage that Xia Hanyang would suffer. In the end, he still hoped that his grandson would slowly let go of Wei Wei Bai. Chapter 1908. As long as Wei Wei Bai disappeared from his life, this wish could always be fulfilled. Old Master Xia got up and left with a heavy heart. Wei Wei Bai sat on the chair. The system reminded her, there is a surveillance camera. It recorded just now. Do you want me to erase it? Wei Wei Bai shook her head and was about to say something. The nanny had come over and put a bowl of nourishing soup in front of her. The little master wanted me to watch you finish drinking. He was afraid that you wouldn't drink, so he specially asked me to take care of you. The nanny smiled gently. Wei Wei Bai nodded, then picked up the bowl and drank slowly. The nanny said gently, I've never seen the little master like someone so much. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless and didn't say anything. The nanny didn't care and continued, Can't you like him? Wei Wei Bai also knew that the nanny saw her disdainful look. In this world, except for Xia Hanyang, everyone knew that she didn't like Xia Hanyang. It was the fault of the side mission. A top student couldn't like a bad student, so every time Xia Hanyang was close to her, she would show a disdainful look. Xia Hanyang couldn't see it, but it didn't mean that others couldn't see it. It wasn't that her acting skills were bad. Everyone could see that she didn't like Xia Hanyang. It was that she couldn't put on a loving expression. In other planes, everyone thought that she loved her target so much that she loved him to death. In this world, except for the idiot Xia Hanyang, everyone could see that she disliked him, because this was the only way not to lose points. Wei Wei Bai drank the soup silently, put the bowl down, and then picked up the book with a check. It's impossible to like him. I never liked him from the beginning. Wei Wei Bai's voice was calm, without a trace of fluctuation. It was as if she was asking if she had eaten something so natural and indifferent. She got up from the sofa and looked down at the nanny. Now I've changed my life. By changing him, I've made his grandfather look at me in a new light and got the money to change my life. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but smile. 10 million is a lot. The nanny became agitated. But the young master can give you so much more. You're working so hard to make him better and learn. I thought you liked him. This nanny was a little old. It was said that she had taken care of Xia Hanyang since he was a child. Therefore, they all treated Xia Hanyang as their own child and loved him dearly. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai disliked Xia Hanyang so much, how could she not feel anxious and upset? Wei Wei Bai tilted her head and looked at the nanny calmly. I asked him to love learning purely because I couldn't stand having bad students around me. Of course, I know that Xia Hanyang can give me more, but unfortunately, she paused for a moment before saying indifferently, it's a pity that I don't like him. The thought of spending the rest of my life with him makes me feel uncomfortable. So wouldn't it be better to take the money and live a carefree life? The system and the nanny were speechless. Oh my God, the host is such a scumbag. He was so trashy that it shocked everyone present. Wei Wei Bai knocked on her book and said calmly, I will leave after the college entrance exam, so we should coexist peacefully for the next few months. After saying that, she calmly turned around and walked into the library. The nanny was shocked. The system was also shocked. What was going on? Although this was the host's true thoughts. But the strategy had not been completed yet. If Xia Hanyang found out, the strategy in the future would probably be as difficult as hell. The system said, I'll help you erase the recorded video. There was a surveillance camera in the living room. Wei Wei Bai smiled. It's okay. Xia Hanyang won't see this. At least before I leave, I won't screw up. If you like that. Chapter 1909. The system asked doubtfully, You should be able to fool them. After all, Wei Wei Bai still had points to offset the punishment. If the host really acted affectionate, no one would be able to see through her. Old Master Xia came to be the bad guy because Wei Wei Bai didn't like Xia Hanyang. If he felt that the host liked the male lead, he probably wouldn't stop it. Wei Wei Bai took out the high school exercise book from the bookshelf and began to do the questions. She could get the top student index by doing the questions. While doing the questions, she said casually, After the college entrance examination, it's time for me to go back. If I leave a corpse behind, Xia Hanyang will cry to death. 100 favorability points. She left. If Xia Hanyang was impulsive, he might not be able to live. After all, in so many planes, Xia Hanyang was the stupidest and happiest. It was very likely that he would take it too hard. Wei Wei Bai said, So I left him a gift. If he really takes it too hard, old Master Xia will definitely take out this surveillance video to let Xia Hanyang know that I'm a scumbag. Then Xia Hanyang may be angry for a year and a half, and then forget about me and continue to live happily. Because Xia Hanyang would definitely feel that it was not worth dying for a scumbag like her. The system still felt that it was risky. Won't he see this video in advance? Wei Wei Bai looked up. Her eyes were hazy, but there was a clear light in them. Don't worry, Xia Hanyang is still too inexperienced compared to his grandfather. Old Master Xia's work was always foolproof. So Xia Hanyang would definitely not see this video before the college entrance examination. Wei Wei Bai smiled. I'm afraid that the idiot will think of a plan after seeing me dead. Although she was still indifferent to him, she seemed to have no feelings for him. But Wei Wei Bai didn't know why, but she had a thought in her heart. She still hoped that he would be fine and could live happily after she died. She didn't know how this sudden thought came about. Maybe it was because the Xia Husky in this plane was quite cute. But the system looked at the blocker. The last time he went to the meeting, he got a stabilizer. This stabilizer could eliminate unnecessary emotional fluctuations. The shield was too unstable. If it exploded one day, it would probably kill Wei Wei Bai. Therefore, The stabilizer would slowly erode the emotions that were about to explode. It was impossible to eat up all of Wei Wei Bai's feelings. But, at the very least, it could eliminate a part of her feelings. She was not in so much pain that she could not bear it. The system felt like it was the grandpa. He was really worried about his granddaughter, Wei Wei Bai. When Xia Hanyang was in the amusement park, he received a call from the person he had left in the Xia family's old house to monitor his grandfather. He said that old Master Xia had gone to Wei Wei Bai. He was scared out of his wits. He immediately rushed back. His mind was filled with images of Wei Wei Bai being threatened by his grandfather and crying pitifully with no one to protect her. He wished he could punch himself a few times. He couldn't leave Wei Wei Bai alone. No, he shouldn't be more than a meter away from her. Without him by her side, his grandfather would definitely bully Wei Wei Bai. Although he didn't know what his grandfather had said to Wei Wei Bai. But Wei Wei Bai must be sad. Xia Hanyang opened the door. The nanny was shocked to see him. Little master? Xia Hanyang didn't have time to care about her. Where's Wei Wei? The nanny hesitated and finally said, in the library. Xia Hanyang rushed to the library and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting at the table. Her thin back looked lonely and sad fog. He rushed over and was about to come for her. Wei Wei Bai heard his footsteps and turned to look at him. She took out a stack of 4A paper. You came just in time. Do these math questions. Xia Hanyang. She must be too sad to do the questions. Xia Hanyang softened his eyes and didn't say anything. He sat down obediently and picked up the pen to do the questions. Wei Wei Bai looked calm. She was so happy that her top student index had increased again.
T.
Chapter 1910. They celebrated the new year during the winter break. Wei Wei Bai saw that his favorability had risen to 93. During the new year, Xia Hanyang made a bunch of fireworks. His amusement park didn't accept guests and was directly cleared. Then he took her to the amusement park to celebrate the new year. Under the sound of the waves and the bright light of the fireworks, the smell of alcohol on his lips was almost intoxicating. It was terrifyingly strong. Wei Wei Bai's score was deducted by 20 points. Because she responded to his enthusiasm and didn't dislike him. She even couldn't help but smile at him when he lit the fireworks alone and ran happily under the fireworks. Her favorable impression of him directly shot up to 93. Then it was the start of school. After a week, there was finally a weekly exam. The atmosphere in the senior year of high school was the most tense. Of course, the atmosphere in private schools was much better because many students didn't need to rely on the college entrance examination to change their lives. Last semester, Xia Hanyang was one of them. Now, Xia Hanyang was very nervous about the exam results. After all, the result of hard work would definitely be different. The results of the weekly exam came out. Wei Wei Bai was still the first in the school. Xia Hanyang's words shocked everyone. He actually squeezed into the top 50. Wei Wei Bai heard that her score had risen to 70. His academic genius index was over 95, so she wouldn't have her marks deducted if she was with him. Because in the recognition of the law, 95 could already be with 100. So she still disliked him when he was 70. Xia Hanyang looked at his test paper and then drew Wei Wei Bai's test paper to look at. Not to mention the accuracy, he completely lost in the neatness. Wei Wei Bai's test paper was too clean. There were almost no mistakes in the beautiful handwriting. It was almost the same as the printed answers. Xia Hanyang remembered that when they first met, the first thing he saw was not her. It was her test paper. Because the scroll was so beautiful. Xia Hanyang saw that Wei Wei Bai was looking at his test paper. He blushed a little. Although the top 50 was a rapid improvement. But for some reason, he felt a little ashamed for the first time. There seemed to be a big difference between their test papers. Xia Hanyang reached out to pull his test paper and told her not to look at it. However, Wei Wei Bai reached out and pushed his hand away. She said softly, "Stop fooling around. I'm giving you the wrong questions. You have to continue revising these wrong questions." This result was actually very unexpected, because they had just reviewed the questions for the first year of high school during the winter break. She thought that Xia Hanyang's grades couldn't be good. The results turned out to be pretty good. Xia Hanyang had almost figured out all the questions in grade 1. During their winter vacation, they spent almost 8 to 10 hours reviewing questions every day. Xia Hanyang's foundation had improved in such a short period of time because of a large number of questions and her diligent revision. Wei Weibai felt that in this plane, the strategy was not important at all. What was important was learning. After writing down all the wrong questions, Wei Weibai casually tied up her long hair with a simple hair band, revealing the back of her swan-like slender neck. Her beautiful thick ponytail hung down to her thin back. She had been well-nourished during this period of time, plus all kinds of nourishing medicinal soups. Her skin was tender and healthy. It was like a peach blossom water. Her hazy eyes also carried a sense of clarity and liveliness. Although she still had a childish feeling, people couldn't help but look at her a few more times. Xia Hanyang sometimes stared straight at her. When Wei Weibai explained the wrong questions to him, the only time he was distracted was when she was close to him. Download the at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1911. Her breath was like sweet poison to him. After learning the basics of junior high school, he couldn't help but want to be rewarded. But when he saw her wound, he didn't have any thoughts. But after she gradually got better, the idea of a reward always lingered in his mind. After Wei Weibai explained a question, she casually looked up and found that he was staring at her. "What's wrong?" Wei Weibai asked. Xia Hanyang's ears moved, and his ears were a little red. He immediately looked down at the wrong answer. "Nothing, I just want to know if I can squeeze into the top 30 next time." Wei Weibai shook her head. "You have to do at least 2 more weeks of questions before you can squeeze into the top 30. Xia Hanyang was very smart. He had a good memory and understanding ability. If he really took something seriously, he would learn very quickly. People like him were not really stupid, but lazy. Once he was no longer lazy, his intelligence would burst forth. After all, when Xia Hanyang was a bad student, he could make a lot of money by using crooked ideas. But now that he began to study seriously, the speed of his progress was frightening. His academic genius index was 75. Wei Weibai silently calculated the time and progress. She knew that after the college entrance examination, basically all the tasks could be completed. After school, Xia Hanyang received a call. His eyes instantly turned cold. Then he said, "Detain her. I'll go there in the evening." In the evening, the review was over. At about 10 o'clock, he watched Wei Weibai drink the soup and let her go to bed. Xia Hanyang watched her enter the room and waited for a while to make sure that she was asleep. Then he took his coat and went out. He went to the most expensive and largest bar in the city. The lively and roaring music and dancing on the first floor made Xia Hanyang frown. He hadn't been here for a long time. He used to think that these things could make him excited. Now, he only felt bored. He glanced at the time. He had to be home before 12 o'clock. If Wei Weibai accidentally woke up and knew that he was not here, how could he explain that he went out and didn't come back at night? He was now a good boy in Wei Weibai's eyes. He didn't dare to let her see his vicious side at all. He invited an authoritative old Chinese medicine practitioner to examine Wei Weibai's body. The diagnosis made him tremble with fear. Due to severe malnutrition from a young age, his body was in a deficit. His foundation was weak. Coupled with the fact that he was overly worried, his body was lacking in qi and blood. His body, which was already very weak to begin with, had suffered heavy injuries because of the great calamity. If he didn't take advantage of his youth to recuperate and nourish his body, he would have a short life in the future. He didn't dare to tell Wei Weibai the result. But from that day onwards, he had been keeping an eye on her body every day. Excessive joy and anger were very taxing on the mind. Therefore, he did not dare to make her angry or overly emotional. This led to him turning into an obedient little mutt, wishing that he could put away all of his thorns, not daring to make her worry in the slightest. Brother Xia here." His followers were excited to death when they saw him. Because in the past few months, ever since Xia Hanyang chased after Wei Weibai, His brother Xia had changed from a super bad student to a good boy who loved to study. This result made a lot of people's eyes pop out. A bunch of them had bet at the beginning that Xia Hanyang couldn't be with Wei Wei Bai for a long time, so they just wanted something new. In the end, they lost everything. Xia Hanyang was completely trapped by Wei Wei Bai. This matter had become the most popular topic in their circle. Xia Hanyang was wearing elegant casual clothes. His hair had long been cut short and hung down softly. His arrogant appearance in the past had now become well-behaved and delicate. The download address is at
https://www.sashu.com.
Chapter 1912. He looked at the group of non-mainstream followers and frowned in disdain.
Where is she?
It's so noisy. Don't meet in this kind of place in the future. Followers, you used to like this kind of place the most. Xia Hanyang sat in the middle of the bench. A waiter immediately came over and poured wine. The wine was the best golden champagne. Xia Hanyang said expressionlessly, "What's the matter?" Follower, "I'm not sure. Brother Xia, this woman insists that the child is yours. It's been 6 months. While they were talking, a girl with a big belly was led here by a waiter. Her eyes lit up when she saw Xia Hanyang. Hanyang. Xia Hanyang looked her up and down, and his eyes stopped at her belly. He immediately frowned and said in disgust, "We're not close enough to call each other by name."
Who are you?
Tears rolled out of the girl's eyes. 6 months ago, I met you on your cruise ship. That day, you were drunk and Xia Hanyang frowned, picked up a glass of champagne, and smashed it at her feet. Are you fucking delusional? I'm still a virgin. Are you saying that I can make you give birth through space? I'm still a virgin. These words were spoken with conviction and confidence. The scene fell into an awkward silence. The girl trembled a little but said firmly, "You were in room 203 at that time. I didn't go wrong." Xia Hanyang waved his hand, and the follower immediately took out his laptop to retrieve the surveillance data from June last year. The girl's face turned pale. She had endured for so many months because she had heard that in some places the surveillance footage would be deleted when the time was up. But it hadn't been deleted on the cruise ship? After Xia Hanyang found the surveillance data, he put the laptop in front of him. He took a sip of champagne expressionlessly. He hadn't drunk in a long time, and the taste made him frown. But his addiction to alcohol was aroused, and he continued to drink. His self-restraint and temper had improved a lot recently. If a woman dared to blackmail him like this in the past, he would have flipped the table. The surveillance video clearly showed that the girl was a waitress. But she was only an outside model in the previous data. She only boarded the cruise ship for the money. Maybe he saw Xia Hanyang's heroic spirit and found out his identity, so he had the idea of blackmailing him. After all, Xia Hanyang was still young. She did not expect to enter the Xia family. She was here to extort a sum of money so that she could abort the child. When Xia Hanyang saw her belly, he would definitely keep quiet. His family would not allow her to give birth to the baby. Therefore, he would definitely give her money. 6 months ago, she was very sure that Xia Hanyang was drunk that day. She also knew the room number. She had pretended to enter the wrong room. But she couldn't open the door because it locked automatically. It couldn't be opened without a password or a fingerprint. Only a few people knew the password to Xia Hanyang's room. She couldn't find out, so she hooked up with someone else on the ship. At that time, she didn't want to blackmail him with her child. She just wanted to hook up with Xia Hanyang. In the end, because of an accident, she actually got pregnant. She immediately had a bad idea. Even if it was just extorting a sum of money, it wouldn't hurt Xia Hanyang. A rich man at his age must be very afraid of this kind of trouble. Xia Hanyang tapped on the video on his laptop. Look at the video. You can't enter my room at all. How did I get you pregnant? Through the door?
T.
Chapter 1913. The girl blushed and was a little embarrassed. She trembled all over, sat on the ground, and cried. My heart is filled with lard. I'm just at my wit's end. Brother Xia, please spare me. Xia Hanyang was not a kind person in the past. His methods were very cruel and cruel. The followers looked indifferent, and one of them said casually, "Brother Xia, leave it to us." Xia Hanyang rubbed his temples and looked at the time. He said irritably, "Give her a sum of money and tell her to get lost." The followers were speechless. This was not Xia Hanyang's style. They didn't react in time. Xia Hanyang said, "I'm in a good mood recently. Take the money and leave the city. Don't let me see you, or you won't be so lucky next time." The girl was overjoyed. "Thank you, Brother Xia. Thank you." Xia Hanyang asked one of the followers to transfer the money and then continued to drink. Seeing him drinking silently, the followers couldn't help asking in a low voice, "Brother Xia, why don't you let some girls join in the fun?" Xia Hanyang kicked the table and almost kicked it over. "Am I such a casual person?" The followers asked, "Are you sure you don't want to teach that woman a lesson?" After all, this was not Xia Hanyang's character. Xia Hanyang glanced at them coldly. "If you have time to teach people a lesson, you'd better study. The college entrance examination is coming." The followers immediately stopped talking. Xia Hanyang drank a little impatiently. He didn't have much time and had to go home. There was no wine at home, and he didn't dare to drink. He was afraid of being found out by Wei Bai. He drank a few more mouthfuls and wouldn't drink in the future. After all, wine was bad for the body. It didn't matter if he drank. What if Wei Bai suddenly wanted to taste the wine?
She was so weak.
Wouldn't drinking kill her? Xia Hanyang's face was a little red as he drank. He knew that he was getting drunk. With the cup in his mouth, he heard the people next to him talking about how he had let that woman go. Xia Hanyang couldn't help but answer vaguely, "She doesn't like me like this." Wei didn't like him bullying others. She didn't like his violent side. He was cultivating himself and trying to change his character. The lackeys immediately shut their mouths. Only then did Xia Hanyang realize what he had said. Wasn't it obvious that he was afraid of his wife? However, his wife was Wei Bai. She didn't seem to be a coward. In fact, she was a little sweet. Xia Hanyang chuckled. Then he threw the cup away. "Send me home. Drink and don't drive." His life was very precious now. A man with a baby in his heart was very afraid of death. After returning home, he felt like he was walking on clouds, as if he was walking on clouds. It was past 12 o'clock. He had to take a quick shower and then go to bed. He couldn't let Wei Bai find out that he was fooling around in a bar. Although he only drank and didn't touch anything, he still felt guilty. Suddenly, the door opened. Wei Bai was thirsty and wanted to drink water. Suddenly, she saw Xia Hanyang tiptoeing forward. Xia Hanyang was shocked and looked at Wei Bai in confusion. She was wearing a white nightgown, and the soft skirt was as beautiful as the clouds. Her hair was very long. He didn't allow her to cut it short because he had a dirty idea in his mind. When she was lying on the bed, her long hair spread out.
How beautiful she was.
Wei Bai frowned. "Xia Hanyang, have you been drinking?" Xia Hanyang immediately felt guilty and blushed. "No, just a little." Then he suddenly stumbled to her. He couldn't help but reach out and hug her. He nestled his face in her neck and rubbed against her. Wei. He reeked of alcohol and said in a childish tone, "I miss you." Wei Bai didn't push him away. She said calmly, "Well, go take a shower and go to bed." Xia Hanyang was a little angry. He shook his head hard and hugged her tightly. "I'll listen to you if you promise me one thing." Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. This fool was drunk. How could he talk about conditions? Xia Hanyang burped and said happily, "I want to have a baby with you." Wei Bai, Xia Hanyang continued to whisper in her ear, "I want to have a baby with you, Wei. I don't want other people's baby." Wei Bai sighed. He was really stupid when he was awake, and even more stupid when he was drunk. She said helplessly, "We'll have another baby later. Now go to bed." Xia Hanyang's eyes lit up, and he looked up excitedly. When will it be later? In fact, he began to sober up. Now he was drunk and couldn't wait to set a date immediately. Wei Bai was silent. Then she whispered, "Are you sober?" Xia Hanyang immediately touched his nose.
No.
Xia Hanyang was a little embarrassed. He immediately turned around and said, "I'm going to take a shower." He reeked of alcohol. He didn't want Wei Wei Bai to pass out. Suddenly, there was a faint promise behind him. After the college entrance examination, Xia Hanyang froze until he heard the sound of the door closing behind him. He was sure that it was not a dream. He suddenly turned around with an incredible smile on his face. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 95.
T.
Chapter 1914. Xia Hanyang felt as if he had eaten an elephant. He was in high spirits. The speed of his revision was also increasing rapidly. His grades were also in the top 15, as if he had eaten an elixir. Private schools did not have as many students as public schools. But this result was enough to make people stunned. Xia Hanyang felt that he was not working hard enough. His active state was completely different from his perfunctory state. He also had more teachers than others, because as long as he wanted to, he could get in touch with all kinds of university professors. Even in the quiz round, he had more advantages than anyone else. Xia Hanyang only had one thought in his mind. The college entrance examination results were his gift to Wei Wei Bai. It was a confession gift. On the day the college entrance examination results were announced, Wei Wei Bai was going to have a child with him. He even started to contact people to design a wedding ring. Of course, he could not get married after the college entrance examination. However, it was a heavy promise that he had to give. Thinking of Wei Wei Bai, Xia Hanyang felt that his life was full of courage. In the past, when he was eating, drinking, and having fun, he felt that those who worked hard for their families were a little silly. He could not even understand. Now he understood that mentality very well. Working hard for one person, she would feel that all her hard work was worth it. After the mock exam, he checked the answers with Wei Wei Bai. Xia Hanyang couldn't help but run behind her and reach out to hug her halfway through his answer. He did not dare to use too much strength. After all, she was not in good health now. He put his head on her neck and said in a low voice, "Wei Wei, sometimes I really want to lock you up." There had been too many love letters recently. Since she was well-nourished, she was in good spirits. Besides, her clothes were all chosen by him, although she tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. But the material of the clothes was so good that many people saw her beautiful side, even if she kept silent. Besides, she always had the best grades. She had almost become a legend in the school. Those D*MN boys, they really sent love letters through every nook and cranny. Many of them were because the college entrance examination was approaching. If they did not confess now, they would not have a chance. Therefore, it was not for the sake of dating, but for the sake of fulfilling his own wish. That was why he bravely ran over to confess. However, there were too many people who had such thoughts. As a result, there were dozens of love letters under Wei Wei Bai's desk. After cleaning them up, he checked the names one by one. Then, one by one, they were invited out of school for repairs. However, he was still sulking in his heart. Those blind people, he was already so intimate with Wei Wei Bai. Even a fool would know that she was his girlfriend. She even dared to write a love letter without regard for her life. He deserved a beating. Wei Wei Bai hugged his warm body and felt a little warm. She turned her face and said softly, "Do you know the answer now? Focus on learning. Don't let your imagination run wild." Xia Hanyang pressed her down and said in a sullen tone, "But you have a lot of love letters." Wei Wei Bai said helplessly, "You have more love letters. Why are you talking about me?" Xia Hanyang's eyes lit up. "Are you jealous?"
/
Chapter 1915. Wei Wei Bai was as calm as the wind. "No, you make me feel safe. I know you won't cheat on me." A favorable impression of 95 points was already as solid as a piece of iron. It was not easy for others to pry Xia Hanyang away. Xia Hanyang was disappointed, but he was still happy. After all, he was very successful in being a good boy. Wei Wei Bai believed him. Xia Hanyang hugged her and promised seriously, "No woman can enter my eyes except you." What a young and frivolous promise. In a few years after she left, this kind of adolescent promise would basically disappear. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while. Suddenly, she gently wrote a few lines on the paper with a pen. Then she handed it to Xia Hanyang behind her. Here, love letter. Just as she finished speaking, the deduction came again. Deducting 10 points from the top student index, 30 points remaining. Wei Wei Bai was very calm. After Xia Hanyang's grade soared, her index was enough to cope with the intimate punishment. Xia Hanyang was a little confused. Love letter. Then he saw a few lines of shallow words on the calculation paper. Student Xia, every time I see you studying seriously, my heart beats faster. I like you who loves to study. After the college entrance examination, please date me. From student Bai who silently follows you. She was really learning when she opened her mouth. However, it was the first time Xia Hanyang saw the word study. His heart suddenly accelerated. As if he had drunk wine, he felt dizzy. His mind was a little muddled. It was like living in a dream. In fact, they were already dating. However, it was the first time Wei Wei Bai confirmed this fact so clearly and directly. Her attitude was sometimes too cold. He poured out his enthusiasm and occasionally felt uneasy. But holding the love letter in his hand, he suddenly felt that all his uneasiness disappeared. Student Bai, we agreed that after the college entrance examination, we will officially and truly date on the premise of marriage. On the premise of marriage. These 3 words were the key. He enunciated them very accurately and fiercely. It felt as if they were engraved into her bones. Wei Wei Bai stared at him with a pair of hazy eyes. She seemed to be a little slow and unable to react. Then she nodded blankly. Okay, student Xia. Her dazed look melted Xia Hanyang's heart. Ding. The male lead's favorability is at 97. Her natural enthusiasm caused her favorable impression of him to rise again. Listen carefully. I will work hard for the exams and study hard, so you can't let me down. Bai Weiwei's face was silent. No. It was confused. Xia Hanyang couldn't help laughing. Then let's continue with the right and wrong questions. After saying that, he impatiently rolled under the sofa to the floor and jumped up again. He was simply too energetic. He pulled out a large pile of papers. Correct the questions correctly. I'm going to work until dawn to do the papers. Wei Wei Bai finally returned to normal. A bad student had turned into a child who loved learning so much. Wei Wei Bai was also very surprised. What was even more surprising was that his academic genius index had reached 85. It was too scary. She realized that the academic genius index was not a temporary result. But how firm Xia Hanyang's learning attitude was, how much the academic genius index would increase. Chapter 1916. His current academic genius index was very stable. It meant that Xia Hanyang's learning attitude was particularly firm. Wei Wei Bai took half of his paper. Review the wrong questions first. You must go to bed before 11 o'clock. You can't stay up late. Xia Hanyang felt that staying up late was not the reason for his failure at all. But Wei Wei Bai was so concerned about him. He immediately nodded happily. Time passed slowly, and the weather slowly warmed up. After the mock exam, Xia Hanyang's grades had squeezed into the top 10 of the school. Everyone was shocked by Xia Hanyang's results. From cheating and getting in through the back door to, what the fuck? It turned out to be a real result to how did he improve? Xia Hanyang also got rid of the title of a bad student. He became the school's favorite student. Seeing him was like seeing his performance. After all, a student who was the last one a year ago had made rapid progress to the top 10 of the school. This contrast, this improvement, they could put up banners to publicize it. The time of the college entrance examination was approaching, and Xia Hanyang was still at the same pace. He ate, drank, did questions, and studied. At the same time, he sneakily kissed and hugged Wei Wei Bai. Oh, this kind of life was indescribably happy. Especially when he and Bai Weiwei were stuck together every day. Other people's feelings were too sticky, and they would definitely be bored. He didn't feel it at all. There was only one kind of greasy feeling, and the urge to use double-sided tape to stick the two of them together. The more clingy, the happier he was. His and Bai Weiwei's identities seemed to have been switched. Generally, boys would dislike girls for being too clingy. But now, Weiwei Bai was very calm, and he had become a clingy little wolf dog. He revolved around her every day, and he was never tired of it. Before the exam, Weiwei Bai gave Xia Hanyang a summary review exam. The final result was very good. The academic genius index also climbed to 90. Everything was in her plan, whether it was the favorability or the academic genius index. Everything went very smoothly. After the college entrance examination, she could leave smoothly. When Xia Hanyang saw Weiwei by looking at the test paper and smiling, he couldn't help but feel proud. He crossed his hands behind his head and laughed happily.
Learning.
He just doesn't study. Look at him. He immediately became a top student. Xia Hanyang thought triumphantly. After the college entrance exam, if he was the top scorer, she would definitely worship him. She liked men with good grades.
He was one of them.
On the eve of the exam, the whole class had to take a group photo. Everyone was wearing school uniforms. The boys were at the back, while the girls were at the front. Weiwei Bai tied up her long hair, and a few strands of her bangs accidentally fell in front of her forehead, revealing her delicate and clean face. She was petite and stood in the second row. Xia Hanyang was particularly tall and stood in the last row. Then he was unhappy. He wanted to stand with Weiwei Bai, but Weiwei Bai wanted to take photos. He would not participate in such a silly group activity. Xia Hanyang, who was wearing a school uniform, stretched out his long legs, squeezed the girls away, and stood beside Weiwei Bai shamelessly. All eyes were fixed on Xia Hanyang. He was so tall. If he squeezed into the second row, the people behind him wouldn't be able to see his face. Weiwei Bai couldn't help but say, "Xia Hanyang, stand back." Xia Hanyang crossed his arms in front of his chest and said fiercely, "I'm so short. You can't take photos if I stand behind. You're short when you're 1.8 meters tall. And it seemed that you could continue to grow taller. And don't you feel embarrassed squeezing into a group of girls?" Xia Hanyang was very embarrassed. He raised his eyebrows threateningly. "Do you still want to take photos? If not, change to another one."
T.
Chapter 1917. If her grades were good, she would be a school bully. The teacher could only find chairs for the people behind. Everyone had to stand high to be able to take a picture. Although it seemed to be neither fish nor fowl, it was a good result compared to offending Xia Hanyang. The photographer shouted, "Okay, everyone look forward. 1, 2, 3, smile." Weiwei Bai smiled naturally. Suddenly, a kiss was printed on her cheek. At the last moment, Xia Hanyang bent down gently and kissed her cheek. The photo forever froze this beautiful and sweet scene. In the end, this photo was not retaken and was distributed to everyone. Everyone looked at this photo and was really speechless. The college entrance examination was finally here. When Xia Hanyang was serious, he was very meticulous. Weiwei Bai did not say anything. He had already prepared all kinds of things for the college entrance examination. He had checked the admission ticket twice. Because he knew that Weiwei Bai was nearsighted, he specially asked someone to come to his house to buy glasses for Weiwei Bai. She never wore glasses and never neglected her studies. But during the college entrance examination, something would definitely happen. Her vision could be an obstacle. So Xia Hanyang thought very carefully and specially bought a pair of glasses for her as a backup. Bai Weiwei wore round spectacles, making her look even more delicate and cute. The way Xia Hanyang looked at her gradually changed. A series of pictures of glasses and cat girls flashed through his mind. Weiwei Bai looked at him with a puzzled face. "What's wrong?" Xia Hanyang pursed his lips. It was really hard for him to hold back. Finally, he shook his head. "You will know later." On the day of the college entrance examination, a special car picked them up. Weiwei Bai and Xia Hanyang arrived at the examination hall at the same time. Their examination venues were different, so they had to go separately. Xia Hanyang kept saying to Wei Wei Bai, "Don't be nervous. I will support you if you fail." He was so silly. Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a moment. Suddenly, she looked around and found that no one was paying attention to her. She grabbed his collar, looked up, and left a light scent on his face. "You, don't be nervous.
Do your best."
Her voice was like the freshest and most beautiful blessing, calming his restless heart. She saw his nervousness. Wei Wei Bai was deducted 10 points. However, Xia Hanyang's academic genius index had exceeded 90. Wei Wei Bai entered the examination hall calmly. During the exam, she handed over the celestial learning scroll and spent most of her time chatting with the system. The system said, with the male lead's current learning attitude, he can be considered to have passed the side mission. As long as his grades pass the first tier, the side mission can be completed. 100 points for the side mission. It didn't mean that the male lead had to be the best in the country. After all, this was unrealistic. A score of 100 meant that Xia Hanyang could succeed as long as he had a strong learning attitude and had a higher score than most people. Wei Wei Bai smiled. "I think he'll definitely be able to make it. This plane is actually quite easy. It's almost been a year, and he'll be able to go home." The system nodded and smiled. This plane was indeed relatively easy. Except for a mudslide disaster, everything else went smoothly. Neither the system nor Wei Wei Bai saw a faint red mark on her wrist. The college entrance exam was finally over. Before the results came out, everyone was tense. However, Xia Hanyang felt that he must have done well because he knew many of the questions during the exam. After a lot of questions, he wasn't afraid of the exam. Anyway, it was all questions, so it didn't matter where he did it. Chapter 1918. It would take some time for the results of the exam to come out. Xia Hanyang planned to take Wei Wei Bai out to play, but Wei Wei Bai refused. She also received a call from old Master Xia. "When are you leaving, my grandson?" Wei Wei Bai said. "After the results come out." After a clean call, the two of them tacitly hung up the phone. Xia Hanyang was still rolling on the sofa. "Now I can finally relax. I swear my grades are really good. Let's go out to play, Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai rubbed his hair. "Let's play after the results come out." Xia Hanyang became docile after she rubbed his head. Xia Hanyang was happy every day while waiting for the results. He had already started to plan their summer vacation trip. All the tourist routes in Europe and America had been dug out. Paris, France could buy a lot of luxury jewelry. She didn't want it. He also wanted to cultivate her awareness of spending money. How could she be so thrifty now? He didn't have the motivation to make money. The more money she spent, the more energy he had when making money. By the way, he didn't know if the car in Germany was ready yet. He planned to teach Wei Wei Bai how to drive. He would book a limited edition car for her and tell her that it was an ordinary brand, in case she didn't get in the car. Xia Hanyang knew Wei Wei Bai's character. She was very simple and didn't spend money. For so long, she hadn't even spent the tuition fee he gave her. Except that the things he tried so hard to give her were a little expensive. She didn't spend much money at all. He wasn't used to it. He had to find a way to let her learn how to waste money. Xia Hanyang was relieved after he booked the plane tickets, the hotel, and the guide. Then he took the initiative to take out the test paper and compare the answers. Wei Wei Bai saw that the academic genius index had exceeded 95. She knew that Xia Hanyang's learning attitude had been completely formed. This attitude would become a habit that would benefit him for a lifetime. It would always be with him. So the academic genius index increased automatically. On the day the results came out, Xia Hanyang stayed by the computer early in the morning. The official website was packed to the brim. With his computer's outstanding internet speed, he managed to squeeze his way in. She glanced at her own results and didn't have any reaction. Then, she ran to look at Wei Wei Bai's results. Then, his dream of betting on Wei Wei Bai's results was shattered. Wei Wei Bai's results were almost 100 points higher than his. Xia Hanyang couldn't help typing on the keyboard. Damn it. He thought he had done very well in the exam. Why were his grades so bad? Wei Wei Bai was drinking Chinese medicine soup. He saw Xia Hanyang kicking the computer. Was his grades bad? But his academic genius index had just shot up to 97. Wei Wei Bai also filled in the numbers with the remaining index points she had. Completed the side quest ahead of time. Xia Hanyang reluctantly moved to Wei Wei Bai's side. Seeing her put down the bowl, he immediately rushed to her. Hugging her, Bai Weiwei's hair was messed up like a bird's nest by his messy movements. Finally, Xia Hanyang breathed heavily on her shoulder and said unwillingly, "Why is there such a big difference between our grades?" Wei Wei Bai said calmly, "Oh, after all, there is an innate social barrier between a bad student and a top student. Hard work can erase everything." Xia Hanyang was almost choked to death by her. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'll bite you." Wei Wei Bai sighed and whispered in his ear, "What's wrong? Is your grades bad?" Xia Hanyang was silent for a while before he said, 620. Wei Wei Bai, damn it. This result was so unexpected. Many people had worked hard for more than 10 years, but didn't get such a result. A year ago, Xia Hanyang was in elementary school. Only now did she realize that Xia Hanyang's learning ability was too amazing. After Xia Hanyang finished, he groaned and said aggrievedly, "You got 729. Wei Wei Bai understood. "I deliberately wrote wrong questions." The Book of Learning Gods was 100% correct. She thought it was too amazing to get all the questions right. She deliberately miscalculated some questions with lower scores. Wasn't this a blow to him? Xia Hanyang felt that how could there be such a big difference between people? He needed to wash his brain. His IQ was definitely not in the same dimension as that of Wei Wei Bai. Xia Hanyang got up and looked at Wei Wei Bai unwillingly. "No, I want to retake the senior exam. I also want more than 700 points. Wei Wei Bai, didn't this kid know what 600 points meant? Why was he so fixated on her score? She helplessly tugged at his collar. "Wait, don't you want the reward?" Xia Hanyang was confused for a moment. "What reward?" Wei Wei Bai smiled and her eyes curved. There seemed to be the whole starry sky shining in her hazy eyes. "What do you think?" She whispered in his ear. "The reward for having a baby, my classmate Xia." Xia Hanyang only felt that he had never been so happy. He was so happy that he felt like dying. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 100. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.